The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. I am Anita Seitz, Mayor Pro Tem for Westminster. This evening, our Mayor, Herb Atchison, will be attending late. We are here to discuss our water costs and rates. This is the third in a series of conversations about water in Westminster. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our facilitator, Heather Bergman.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, good evening, Council. Today is, as Anita said, workshop number 3. It's the one you've been hitting at, being real excited about. So I'm pretty jazzed that we have on tonight's conversation. Chris, next slide.
Hang on, sorry.
Maybe.
Colors again.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Get me. Here we go.
Ah. So quick reminder for those for whom this is, if this is your first adventure with us, we started on October 8th, talked a little bit about setting the stage, talked about your interests on council, and began our conversation about water infrastructure. Then on the 20th, we continued and got to the end of the water and wastewater infrastructure conversation, and then talked for a brief bit there about meters at the end. We've talked a little bit about community engagement, and council at our last meeting, you agreed that we should put that on hold until you get through your discussion so you have a better sense of what you might want to engage the community about. So tonight we're talking about water costs and rates, and then we're teed up for a couple weeks from now to talk about wastewater costs and rates. I do want to let you know that we probably have a 10-pound meeting in a 5-pound bag tonight. And rather than push through the whole slide deck, we would rather stop a couple times and let you talk amongst yourselves. So we may need to carry some of tonight over into the 17th, but we've talked about it and we think that we can get it all in by the end of that 4th meeting so that you can get to December 15th and really chat about those options, ideas that you think are the most important, the most salient, and that you would want to chat about the community with. Next slide. So just quick reminder, part of what we're trying to address here is not only conversations or questions that emerge from my conversations with council, but also some of the themes that have come up in community feedback so far. Those include meters, which we have addressed to some degree, rates in comparison to other areas. That's on the table for tonight. Tier 3 rate in particular, that we'll talk about tonight. Billing periods, we talked a little bit about that at our last meeting. And public works and utilities finances, again, on the docket for tonight. Number of taps and how they affect growth. We might get to that one tonight. We shall see. It certainly is in the slide deck, might have to roll to next time. And then impacts of hot summer weather on usage and rates. That's more of a policy consideration that you all can kick around in December. Next slide. Additionally, since we've started these workshops, comments and questions from the community have been rolling in. It's fantastic to see that people are tracking along with us. Among the things that we've heard are, based on the last conversation, a preference for regular billing cycles, a preference for billing based on actual gallon usage instead of that 1,000 gallons as we talked about last time. We'll touch on that a bit tonight as well. Some requests to make customer usage data available faster, concerns about the customer portal and how folks will access it if they don't have computers or smartphones or other advanced technology. We've seen some comments about the asset management database system that Julie talked about last time, that really, really tiny print spreadsheet, and whether that's the best way for y'all to be or for staff to be tracking information. We've had some requests to complete the rates discussion and the outreach before the next irrigation season so that folks have some closure as they go into the lawn watering in next summer. Several comments just appreciating that you're doing this, and folks seem to be learning a lot and are grateful for it. And then we got one offer for someone to volunteer on an advisory group or a focus group if and when we get to that phase, and that's how you'd like to proceed. Chris? So I think I've already covered on this one where we've assigned the community concerns to the different meetings. Next slide. So a quick reminder, Council, I asked you at our first workshop just to identify what your interests are. For folks who are just joining us, an interest is the underlying why of what we say we want. And council provided this great list of interests that we'll use as a touchstone when we go forward and start talking about solutions and ideas. So we don't need to belabor that one at this time. Next slide. So again, a little bit of a different approach tonight just in terms of the slide deck, but our overall goal is you'll get some presentation slides from Chris related to costs and rates and other such things. We'll answer your clarifying questions. We've again tried to have staff unpack information for you in a new way. So I hope some of this is new and interesting to you. We'll take your questions, and then if we can't get you questions to answers today, we'll get them to you after the conversation like we did previously. Quick reminder, really want you to be thinking about, okay, now I understand. Now here's what's interesting. Here are my takeaways. I will at several times in our time together tonight ask you, what are you thinking? What have you learned? What's interesting? What are your takeaways? And just a quick reminder to all that we aren't making policy recommendations or decisions tonight. This is all teeing up for a council conversation going forward. Chris, next slide. So we've agreed to sort of a general approach to this. Folks might have already noticed that we've agreed to use first names among members of council and staff and myself during these discussions, just because we're going to talk to each other like human people. It's bold, but we're going to do it. We're going to assume good intentions and other people's comments and questions, that everyone wants to do what's right for the city, and acknowledge that people have a range of views about what right is and how you might achieve that. Bringing in our best optimism to the table, because people who disagree solve problems, hard ones, big ones, all the time. And this group can certainly do it as well. As you're asking questions, I'll ask you to come at that with trying to understand the information and not to convince other people of your own opinions and your own perspectives. Fully expect to hear some disagreement, and that's fantastic. That's what democracy is all about. But we can disagree with civility, saying that's not how I understand it, or that's versus that's wrong. I heard that differently. I experienced that differently. I remember that differently, as opposed to that's not what happened, you big dummy. So of course, really want you to focus on those what ifs. What if we tried this? What if we did that? Could we do this? Could we try this other thing? And then, yeah, we could do that if we can find a way to crack this nut or solve that issue, address that interest. And we're going to put any kind of no because aside, because that's not the solution-oriented thinking that we're hoping to bring tonight. Next slide. All right, I'm going to now hand it over to Christine Gray, Westminster City staff, because the actual answers to a couple of questions we've heard from the community since our last workshop are way above my level of expertise, but not hers. Chris, if you'd introduce yourself ever so briefly, hit us with these questions, and then carry on, my friend.
All right, thank you, Heather. So my name is Christine Gray. I am the Business Operations Coordinator for the Public Works and Utilities Department. And my team and I and Max Kirschbaum, our director, are in charge of coming up with the rate recommendations for your body to approve every couple of years. So this slide is some customer questions since the last workshop. We have offered our listening audience the opportunity to provide us with questions or comments on the city website. There's also a phone number there, so if you don't have access to a computer, you're listening to this from somewhere else, please let us know if you need that phone number or that website information, and we can get that to you. But we wanted to let you know what people are thinking about and what they're asking since the last couple of workshops. So there are about 5 questions here. The first one says that it appears that infrastructure is replaced based on industry standard life. Are operating staff involved in capital planning? Can the life of infrastructure be extended with proper maintenance? So Julie spoke a great deal during the last couple of workshops about how we go through and replace our infrastructure. Just because it turned 21 years old, so we'll use that analogy again of turning 21, doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be set up for replacement. We do our best to bring every last drop out of every piece of equipment. And yes, our operations staff are involved heavily with the planning for our projects and our replacements. Julie and her team have involved all of operations in her long-term planning processes so that they have their input on what's going to go in, what's going to be replaced, and how it's going to work going forward. Question number 2, how did the sewer UCI drop, the utility condition index, drop by 15% from the years 2015 to 2017? Why is it not more gradual? Did the UCI calculation change, and can we expect a sharp decline in the water UCI? So the sewer UCI is calculated from 3 areas: sewer pipelines, our pumping stations, and then the city's own wastewater treatment facility up at Big Dry Creek. The largest area by far is in sewer pipes, and that's what drives that UCI number. And sewer pipes installed in the 60s and the 70s aged out at around the year 2015, and we're working on replacing those. So those are the primary cause of that drop in the UCI. The method of calculating it hasn't changed. And again, Julie's analogy of thinking about turning 21, the night before your 21st birthday, you can't get a drink, but the next day you can. This UCI is a calculated number just using industry standard useful life. And then when that ticks over, that number declines. But again, we will still wring every last drop out of every piece of equipment that we can. As far as the water UCI goes, it is expected that we will see a decline in that. There is a tremendous amount of asset in that water pipeline section. And also, we are also investing a really small fraction of the total amount needed to reinvest in our utility. We have valued the replacement value of the entire water and sewer utility at $4 billion. And currently we're investing on average of about $30 million a year. That's a little bit less than a reinvestment rate of 1% per year. And that means that we invest in one asset one time in 100 years. And as you might recall from the last workshops, few of our assets have a 100-year lifespan. Question 3, can the customer portal be expedited? Why do we have to wait for all meters to be installed? The software for that project can't be launched until all of our meters are installed and the billing system upgrades are implemented. Right now, our utility billing team is in the middle of a very large upgrade, and our staff are focused on getting that completed, which I believe will be in early first quarter 2021. This is queued up. This project is queued up right behind that. So once our utility billing staff is up to speed on how the billing system upgrades look, this project will be rolling out. We've already actually put out a request for proposals and received several back. So the project has started, it just won't be available to customers until next year. And customers can always call our utility billing hotline to get their hourly usage data. Question 4, is the city analyzing usage data pre and post meter installation? Can that be used to test a theory on social media that new water meters cause spikes in usage? So as a reminder, Stephen covered a lot of this in the last workshop. There are a lot of factors that go into water usage, temperature, precipitation, how many people are in your house, and we can account for that, but not at the level of precision needed to test the accuracy of meters. If we were going to try to duplicate the exact situation that was going on in someone's home before the meter was replaced and then after it was replaced, it would be virtually impossible. We are comfortable that the quality control that's going into place and has been in place, as Stephen mentioned during the last workshop, is addressing all of our customers' concerns. And again, if a customer has a concern about their new meter, please call us and we'll definitely check it out and see what's going on. And the last question is, how are rates calculated for different tiers or customers? We will talk about that later on this evening.
You're lickety split, I do believe.
Yes.
And Chris will include those questions and responses in the summary from tonight's meeting, so folks will have reference to that also going forward.
Yep, and exactly. So tonight's meeting covers water costs and rates. We'll answer the questions that you asked Heather sometime this summer, and we will pause. We've got a couple of pauses built in for you to stop and give us your thoughts, ask some questions, and give us your ideas. And then just a shout out, this has been a huge presentation effort. There are a lot of people involved in this, so I will speak to the areas that are in the presentation, but if we have some deep dive questions, I might ask for some time to get back to you on those.
Or phone a friend, we'll see how it goes.
So right up front, I'm going to go through the questions that you had and give you a quick summary answer. We're going to answer all of them in detail as we go through, but I wanted to be able to at least speak to them up front so you're not waiting for your question to be answered and it might not be tonight. So I'll go through these pretty quickly. We'll get more in depth with them as we go through the presentations. So the first question, how are costs calculated? What's included in the cost amount that's associated with charter and funding mandates? And if water infrastructure work is included in those costs, please separate those out. So costs equal our operating expenses, plus our debt service payments, plus our capital improvement projects, plus our financial policy commitments. All of those are included in one form or another in the charter and funding mandates. Are water rates the same as the city's cost to produce and deliver clean water? If not, what are the additional elements that drive or determine water rates? And if so, what, if any, water infrastructure projects are included? So rates include current and future operating costs, debt service payments, CIP costs, and our financial policy commitments. Is there a difference between basic maintenance repairs and capital repairs for water infrastructure? Where's that line between O&M and capital? What determines that line? So you might recall Julie talking about the work that she does looks at every asset that we have in the system that's over $20,000 in value. And those are budgeted for in our capital project budgets, or CIP. Basic maintenance is pretty much anything that is an asset less than $20,000 or part of the overall regular operating and maintenance part of the system. And those pieces of work are included in the operating budgets. Which of the elements that determine water costs and water rates are relatively constant, which are more variable, and why? So this is a little bit of an it depends question. Debt service and operating budget costs, first of all, are relatively constant. CIP costs can be both. And then which of those elements can the city control or influence, and which ones are out of the city's control and why? There are a lot of elements that are within city's control. We'll tell you more detail in further slides. As we started with in the last presentations, there's going to be a gold star next to the places where City Council has the option to pull a lever. So we'll go through and list those all out for you, but you'll see those on slides going forward. What blue sky thinking has staff done about ways to reduce costs to produce water in the short and long term? What other ideas have you generated and discarded? We have a lot of information to respond to that question, so we'll cover that later on in the presentation, as well as the next question, which is what blue sky thinking has staff done about ways to increase or diversify revenues? Again, a lot to unpack with that, and we'll cover those slides a little bit later. One of the questions that has come up recently over the last couple of years and in the last couple of weeks is, why is it difficult to say how much it costs to provide 1,000 gallons of clean drinking water? What are the variables that make it challenging, and what's the range of costs? So we did a simple calculation, and 1,000 gallons of water delivered to every single one of our customers, no matter what kind of customer you are, is $7.92 per 1,000 gallons in 2020. So why is that challenging from staff's perspective? Is which 1,000 gallons are you talking about? Are you talking about the first 1,000 gallon? Are you talking about the 14th 1,000 gallon? Or are you talking about the 100,000th gallon? In our world and the way that the rates are set up, those costs are very different. And then what kind of customer are you? We have different rates for different customers. So we made it a lot more difficult than it needed to be. But basically, if we were going to deliver 1,000 gallons of water to our customers, it would cost $7.92. So right now, this is a blank screen. There's going to be a lot that I'm going to walk through. This is the story of how we calculate rates. Each box is going to have slides devoted later on in the presentation, but this gives you an overview of the process that we use. So we start off with what is our projected revenue with current rates? And we look at projected water consumption by each of our customers, the rate revenue based on the current rates that they are charged, projected tap fee and non-rate revenue, and we get to projected revenue with current rates. Then we take a look at our plan for the future, and we include everything from our projected CIP to our CIP financing strategy. Are we going to pay with cash? Are we going to pay with debt? Are we going to pay with a mix? We'll talk more about that later. And then what's the required debt service that goes along with that? And debt service is basically our payments back for borrowing money. We look at our operating budgets. We look at our debt service coverage policy. The city does have one that City Council adopted in 2011. And then we have our utility fund reserve policies that were adopted by City Council back in 2006. And that gives us our future revenue needs. So what does this mean for our customers? So now we're going to go right to left instead of left to right. We come up with a projected rate increase. We internally within staff look at the bill impact and the affordability analysis. And I'll be curious to hear the definition that each of you assign to affordability, because it means so many different things to so many different people. We adjust our financial plan by looking at all of those middle sections again, and we come up with a rate recommendation. So the stars here represent where you have the opportunity to pull a lever, as I mentioned. So the tap fee revenues, the CIP financing strategy, what the projected CIP program looks like, what our budgets look like, and what our policies are. And then again, that conversation about affordability. So I realized after I put this together that we used a deep dive with water, which was not intended, but it is what it is.
Nerds.
So I want to define a few terms. What's a utility? We use that word a lot. You know, the water utility, the stormwater utility, the sewer utility. A utility is an organization that provides a service. And some of that service is either provided through a city or through a special district. And we have 3 utilities. We have all 3: storm, sewer, and water. We're not talking about storm, we're not talking about sewer, we're talking about water tonight. So what's an enterprise? This is where we start getting into some more outside influences and rules about what we are and what we do. So an enterprise, as defined by Colorado's Constitution, is a government-owned business authorized to issue its own revenue bonds and receiving under 10% of annual revenue in grants from all Colorado state and local governments combined. So this basically means that we can only receive revenue from our rate payers who receive the service. We can receive a small amount, up to 10%, from local tax money. So if you take a look at our 2019 charges for water services, which were about $57 million, 10% is $5.7 million. So give or take that dollar amount, there would probably be a very much more specific calculation. We could receive up to $5.7 million from an outside source towards the utility. And what happens if we go over that? Well, there are a few things that happen. I don't know about council's ability to set rates because this is a fee for a service that might not be impacted. But if we receive more than 10% of our revenue from an outside source, if we were going to go issue debt to pay for projects, we would have to go to the voters for that. And that's one specific example. We would be subject to TABOR. Another TABOR requirement would be that if we receive more revenue than our expenses, we would have to provide a refund. And I'm not sure how we would calculate that based on revenues that we've received from our customers. So that would be a difficult calculation to perform. But those are 2 things that I could think of that would happen if we surpassed that amount. And we use the term water fund. So the water fund means anything that has to do with providing water to our customers. This slide should look familiar to you from the last presentations. Everything from our water source to our treatment plants, to our storage, to our distribution, to our pump stations, getting it to your house. Again, we're not talking about the wastewater side of the world, and we're not talking about reclaimed water tonight.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just about to ask, do you want us to wait until the pause for questions? I think Dave, I think what they had asked is that they would get through it and then we'd have a time for questions. Are you okay with that?
It won't be as long as it was last time.
Okay,
Right, Chris?
it was just specific to what we were just talking about, but if you want us to wait, that's fine.
Let her get through it and then we'll give you time. All right, Chris, carry on.
Sorry about that, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
I'm talking fast, so we should be there soon. So we break the water fund up into three major sections. We have expenses, we have revenues, and we have reserves. And so you all had some great difference between costs and rates. What I want to do is provide some context about what each of these sections looks like so that that will give you some background information. So we'll start with expenses because Julie kicked off these workshops by talking about infrastructure, which costs money to replace. So we'll talk about operating budgets, our CIP program, and debt service. So right off the bat, I'll give you a big pie chart. In 2021, all of our water costs, and I'm using the word costs and expenses interchangeably here. So all of our water costs and expenses are anticipated to be just about $59.4 million. And you can see that there are 6 buckets that represent that dollar amount. The biggest one is our operating expenses to run and maintain the utility, followed by our CIP program in the upper left there in the tan color. We have a planned transfer to the capital project reserve in the orange right down in front. We've got some transfers to the general fund in the gray color, and then we have some debt service in purple. That dollar amount is off to the side, not in the pie chart. And then we have a little tiny skinny pie slice that represents transfers to our property liability self-insurance fund and our payment in lieu of use tax funds. Really tiny pie. So those are all of the costs that go along with providing water service to our customers next year. So I'm taking the operating expenses and creating a pie chart out of that. So you can see that now there are just 4 categories as operating expense. So again, the same dollar amount for operating expenses, again, the cost to operate and maintain the utility, and then our transfers, which are represented by the orange, the gray, and the green. So what goes into each of these sections? I'll walk through each of those. We have people, we have staff, salaries, benefits, retirement funds, training, certifications, that costs about $10 million a year. Our contracts range from legal and engineering contracts to equipment maintenance.
Excuse me, Chris. Counselor Seymour, I'm sorry, Rich has lost connection. Oh, he is back on. Can you hear her, Rich? Okay.
Yeah, yes, I can. Thank you. That was just momentary.
Okay.
Tough in the bunker, man.
Right at the best part. So people represent about $10 million, just to come back a little bit. Contracts are about $12 million, and the vast majority of that is represented by a handful of things. That would be, we have a pass-through contract between the city of Thornton and the city of Brighton. We buy water from Thornton and we sell it to Brighton. So that's a large contract. It's about $4 million. We have about $1 million of ditch assessments. So we belong to many ditches that provide us our water, and we have to pay for our ownership in those ditch companies. We also have legal engineering expenses. We have power costs. We have about $1 million worth of power costs at the water treatment facility, council, and our engineering contracts that go towards maintaining our water rights portfolio. We have a water rights portfolio that is valued at $1 billion, and it costs money to make sure that we are keeping on top of that. So we have a specialty engineering firm, actually we have a couple of them, and we contract with a specialty attorney to help us with that. Products needed to do work, the stuff, so the equipment, the fuel, the chemicals, the supplies, the pipeline, things like that. We have transfers. We have overhead costs that we pay to the general fund. Again, the property liability self-insurance fund, our payment in lieu of sales tax, which is applied to heavy equipment that's used on some of our big projects, and then planned transfers to the capital project reserve. That's $17 million. And then there's a little tiny amount there for small dollar value assets. So again, those $20,000 items, computers, trailers. We hold meters in stock in case we have to replace them, or when people are building houses, we can put them in. So that total is approximately $41.2 million. So one of the questions you had was, is there a difference between basic maintenance and capital repairs? And again, it just comes down to that dollar value. So CIP projects are the big projects. They're the tank projects, the large pipeline projects, the water treatment facility projects. Basic maintenance work, while our operating costs are high, or not high, but they're a lot, that goes into things like our people, our contracts, and then small dollar asset pieces. So next, I will talk a little bit about the capital improvement program. I've got a slide about our next year's 2021 proposed capital project list. There's a star here that can be changed. Capital projects can be changed by your discretion. So there's a list of them. There are about 8 of them. I think there's about 8 of them, and they total $14.5 million. And then finally, I'll talk about debt service. So we have funded our capital projects with a mix of cash and debt. Debt service is just the term that we use to say that we're paying back our loans, and that's a combination of the principal and interest payments. Debt for us is a very useful tool. It shares the cost of large long-term projects over time and between current customers and future customers. So I want to show you our water debt service schedule. So this is our repayment schedule for the next 20 years. Our finance department works really hard to structure our debt so that we have very smooth payments over the course of time. This is just showing you the water debt service. They take a look at our water and our sewer and our stormwater debt and keep all of that packaged, so it's got a very streamlined profile when you look at a graph like this. That helps us in the short term because we get to, well, actually helps us in the long term because our rates are paying our debt service back. And so to the extent that we can keep this profile very streamlined and consistent, that means that we don't have to raise rates just to meet a principal payment. So what I'll do is show you the next slide. Well, actually, right now, keep track of, there's a total outstanding water debt of $106 million. So that's money that we've borrowed. I've got a chart coming up that shows you that broken down by issue. This is a picture of our existing debt service between the water and the wastewater funds. So you can see that there's a much more streamlined profile than there was on the water fund. So if I go back to the water fund briefly, you'll see that it's not as streamlined as that overall water plus sewer profile. 2021 is lower than the majority of the chart. Before we refinanced it, had one payment. And so when we refinanced our debt, we front-loaded interest payments in 2020 and 2021. So that's why 2020 and 2021 are slightly lower. Those principal payments start kicking in 2022. In 21, we have an even lower amount because we had a loan from the Colorado Water Resources Power and Development Authority. That's a mouthful to say. It's a state agency that loans us money. We had a loan drop off, and that was to pay for our Northwest treatment facility. So then you see in 2022 through 2036, we have a very streamlined profile. 2037, 2038, and 2039 just represent that some principal payments were backloaded into that so that we could have that future forward streamlined profile, which looks like this. I can't remember which counselor asked this question fairly recently, but it was, how much debt have we issued? So over the last 20 years, these are the debt issues that we've had and what we've used them for. So it's kind of busy, but in 2000, we issued about $15 million to pay for the Northwest water treatment facility. In 2008, we purchased some water rights from a family, and they requested that we pay them back over a period of time. So they're getting a small amount, about $65,000 a year. In 2010, we issued about $28 million of debt to fund a large number of projects ranging from our reclaim plant expansion, some pipeline and pressure zone work, the Northwest membrane replacement program, and then some wandering view tanks work. In 2016, we issued $51 million, 20 of which was for the water fund. The rest of it was for the wastewater fund. And that was for pressure zone 3 and Sheridan main replacement work. About a year ago, just about a year ago now, we issued almost $44 million, most of which was for the water fund. And that was for a payment for our Wattenberg Reservoir, for a high service pump station work that's going on right now next to the Semper facility, and then for funds associated with the Water 2025 program. And then finally, you might remember that we refinanced our 2010 loan just this past spring. So that shows up again down at the bottom, and that was again for those projects in 2010. So you can see the total of those issues was a little bit over $104 million. And right now we have outstanding principal and interest payments of a little bit over $106 million. So this slide is again another discussion about where we have some rules and constraints about what we can do with rates. So the question is, what is included in the cost amount that is associated with charter mandates? And you're all familiar with the charter. Section 14.6 talks about the fact that rates and charges shall be fixed to meet the operating costs of the utility. And the interpretation that we are working under is that operating costs include current and future operating and maintenance and capital program costs. Another follow-on to that part of the question is Charter Section 11.1C requires that bonds that we've issued be paid back by utility revenues. So there's a lot of verbiage on here. I've bolded the parts that I felt were the most important. Council can issue bonds for the utility fund, and the bonds are paid back out of revenue from the operation of the utility. So we've issued debt to pay for our water projects, and there are some conditions that go along with that, and we consider these to be funding mandates. So our lender requirements, the bond covenants that we have, include that not only do we have 100% of the amount of money that we owe them every year, but some additional pledged revenues. Investors want to make sure that we're good for the money and that we're not living from paycheck to paycheck, that we can pay our bills. So we consider this a funding mandate. We have a city debt policy guideline that requires not only the amount that we're supposed to pay back, but an additional 50% of pledged revenues. So this is more conservative. It also provides us some more room if there is a significant impact to the economy or to our revenue stream. And it's a calculation factor in our rate setting process. So you'll see the star there. This is a policy that was adopted by City Council in 2011 and is certainly a lever that you could pull. So to show you how that looks with a simple analogy and then with a larger analogy, let's take a look at very simple math. Let's say somebody makes $10,000, and by the time that they've spent all of the money it takes to get to and from work, if they were driving to and from work, buying food, paying for energy, things like that, they'd have $8,000 left. And so at the end of the year, they'd have $2,000 remaining in their account. So in this fictitious world, you only have to pay your mortgage once a year, and it's $1,000. Okay, well, in this world, the mortgage lender might require that not only do you have the $1,000, but you have 10% on top of that. Some bond covenants require that we have 25% of that, and our city policy requires that we have 50% on top of that. So each of those dollar amounts is shown below. So on the right-hand side now, we're looking at 2019 actual dollars. So 2019 water income, $57.9 million. Our expenses, our actual expenses were $27.8 million. So we had $30 million remaining. The associated percentage increases are shown when you take a look at the 2019 annual water debt service amount of $5.3 million. And that star is next to the 150% debt service coverage because, again, that's a lever that you could pull. And why does it matter to us to have more funds available? So as I said, it's helpful for us to have a little bit of buffer. Investors want to make sure that they are going to get paid. It puts us in a good, solid financial position to have a little bit more than what we are required to have. And it's similar to having a good credit score. So the cost of borrowing for individuals, we've all been there, bought a house, bought a car, bought a cell phone, they're going to run a credit check on us. So what's our credit score? And that will likely determine our interest rate that we'll pay. So personal credit scores range from poor and 300 to excellent at 850. And on the left-hand side of that arrow, a higher interest rate means it's harder to get credit and it's going to cost you more. Lower interest rate, easier to get credit. So it's a similar situation for the utility. Not quite the same. We're not using Experian and TransUnion and Equifax. We're using rating agencies. So we work with Standard & Poor's, S&P, Fitch, and the city doesn't work with Moody's, but that's the third rating agency. And we get a credit check every time we go out to borrow money. So rating agencies, just like a credit score, are helpful, or a credit agency, are helpful to make sure the utility is in a good spot. So utilities could get a D rating, that's poor, that's really bad. And they can go as high as excellent, which is a AAA rating. Westminster's current credit ratings are AA+ from Fitch and AAA from S&P. So the important thing to me in this slide is that because we have such excellent credit rating, we get lower interest rates. When we get lower interest rates, we borrow at a cheaper rate, which means that when we pay back our loan, we're paying it back at a cheaper rate for our customers. So if we were down in the middle of that arrow, we would have a higher interest rate because maybe we aren't as trustworthy or credible as with a higher rate, and it would cost us more. If it costs us more to borrow, it's going to cost our customers more to pay it back. So again, the same slide from the beginning of this conversation. In 2021, all of our expenses, all of our costs are about $59.4 million divided between about 6 different pie slices. So your question about what blue sky thinking has staff done about ways to reduce costs to produce water in the short and long term? We're always looking at our operating and capital budgets. As I mentioned early on, yes, our operating staff is heavily involved in our capital planning. Julie works with them very closely to make sure that what we are putting in is a we product and not a you're getting this kind of product. They are instrumental in figuring out the best way to put something in that's going to last us as long as possible and is also going to reduce our operating costs long term. We have reduced our water, power, and chemical budgets. They were a little bit heavy for a few years, and we took a look at those and scaled them back so that they were more in line with what we were actually spending. We provided you all a list back in June, I think, of about 140 items that were innovative and sustainable cost-saving practices. And they range across the board from planning to conservation. Most of that document is related to our operations team. So we have done things like figured out a way to dispose of our filter backwash sludge, which sounds nasty, and it is. Our plant superintendent found a way to do this without applying it to, or without having the state step in. So that saved us $200,000. That's a savings for our customers. We do so much in-house water quality testing and studies rather than contracting that out. That not only saves us money with the contract, but it also gives our staff the in-house knowledge that they can carry forward. We do an in-house water main replacement program. So you're probably very familiar with the ones that cut up the street and the main arteries of the city. Our in-house staff does several miles of pipeline replacement every year. And that is, again, instead of contracting that out, more of a savings for our customers. Not recently, but a few years ago, we converted our water treatment plant from gas chlorine to hypochlorite disinfection. And that was a combination of safety and cost, but that was a big thing and a big conversation for our staff. And in this one I included, it's not a water fund related project, but it's just finished up and I was excited to talk about it. We have a dewatering program out at the for our biosolids. So when our wastewater goes to the plant to get treated, those solids that are left over are applied to our farm out east, out on our Strasburg Natural Resources farm. And our dewatering program found a way to reduce nutrients in that land application, which means fewer truck trips out there. That's a cost savings. There are a lot of other process savings that we've had. And then that's obviously a reduced environmental impact. Again, we invest in capital planning to minimize our long-term costs, and we consider conservation in that. So you all just heard Drew Beckwith's presentation on Monday night for the update to our water conservation and efficiency plan. I stole a bunch of slides from him that you'll see in the future. But we are taking a look at whether or not and how conservation is impacting our infrastructure needs. So you saw that our water use overall is declining. How is that impacting our repair and replacement program going forward? And then finally, we refinance existing debt when that's an option. We had a great opportunity to do that this spring. We took advantage of it, and that was a cost savings. So the flip side to that question is, what ideas have you generated and then discarded? So we have a handful of those as well. One thing that we have not talked about fairly recently, but has been discarded in conversations in the past, was consolidating with another utility. Why not just have a big regional water treatment plant? There's a big regional wastewater plant. Why can't you do the same thing with water? Different sources of inflow. Our treatment plant is based on our unique water source. We get our water from Clear Creek. That's very different from any other water source out there. And if we were going to combine with another utility, we would have to install a whole new treatment train for that set of water. So we discarded that idea because it seemed like it would be too expensive to accomplish. In that same vein, we have discarded the concept of reducing treatment. Not only does it go against who we are, we're very proud of the treatment that we provide, but it's also against the law. We have regulations that prevent us from reducing our treatment. We discarded the idea of keeping the existing Semper plant. So you're all familiar with the Water 2025 program. From a 2015 master plan, we learned that it's going to be more cost efficient for us to build a new plant. So we are moving ahead with the Water 2025 program. We'll keep Semper online as long as we can, but we'll phase it out eventually. And then finally, there's a nifty concept out there, and it truly is cool. A P3 public-private partnership contract for managing utility operations. And the reason I say it's cool, I'll qualify that by saying it's a very useful tool for utilities that are either struggling to issue debt, they don't have the credit, they don't have the resources, or they are being faced with a state order to get their operations under control ASAP, and they don't have the means to do that. So a P3 is a way for a private entity to come in, negotiate a contract with the utility or the municipality, and operate the system for X number of years. We have discarded that option for a number of reasons. First of all, there's a private component to this, and so for a private component, that means a profit margin is there. Water customers only use so much water, so there's no real incentive to drive up the use of this commodity for a profit to be made. And so the concern that we have is that if we entered into a P3 contract, the way that you would get a profit is by not reinvesting in the system. So if you're going to save money by not reinvesting in the system, we will see that outcome in the quality of water, perhaps violations, and then what is the condition of the system when the utility and the city receive that back. The other part about P3 is that we wouldn't be having this conversation. A P3 potentially removes the public influence and the public input. So we enter into a contract, done deal. We know what the rates are going to be for X number of years unless they're renegotiated. So none of this discussion, none of this talking to council about what our concerns are would happen. So we discarded that idea. So I'm coming to the end of this section, and one of your questions was, which of all the things we've talked about can the city control or influence? Which are out of the city's control and why? So you'll see this chart show up. The three that we have listed are the level of service. So Julie talked about the CIP program. I talked a little bit about operating budgets. That's both within your control to change and also without. There are some regulations that we have to meet that mean we can't change those things. We do have to meet our debt service obligations, so we can't change that, but we have a city debt service coverage policy that is a lever that you can pull. And here is the point where I will stop, and we can have some conversation.
Fantastic, Chris, and you can take a breath. So Dave had a question and Catherine had a question, and then members of the community, if you have questions, I just want to remind you that we try to answer as many of those as we can. You can put those on the website. And so council, quick reminder, we have three buckets that we're talking about, expenses and revenues and then reserves. So this was that first kind of bucket of things. What questions do you have on those? We'll do questions first, and then I want to hear your takeaways. Dave, you had one way back in the beginning and we're so patient. Go ahead.
Oh, I have a list now. Just kidding. I have a couple.
Go ahead.
Chris, thanks for the presentation, first off. Two questions. The first one that I was curious about, and when you talked about the utility and the rules from Tabor and the charter, would it be possible with the utility under the rules of the charter and Tabor that you could take infrastructure projects and like do a sales tax if you took it to the voters? Like say we had, much like we would do with the court system, and say, hey, we have a new water plant. We think that this is something we want to do, and we would like to do a sales tax in order to bond it and pay for it over X amount of time. Is that something that would be legally possible? Maybe you can't answer that. Maybe that's a question for Mr. Frankel, but just curious.
You're right. I don't have an answer to that, but we can certainly get one. So we'll add that to the list.
Okay, great. My other question is again around how we can allocate funds, and done a lot of reading on the 10% and how that works. So it's confusing. I have a pretty good grasp, but one thing I was curious about when you showed the pie chart of the money that's transferred out of the utility. So the things that we transfer money out of, even though we're allowed to transfer money out of because they're related to the utility in some way, do we have to transfer out? So out of those buckets, are there anything such as personnel or any of those other things that we wouldn't necessarily have to pay for out of the general or not the general fund, out of the utility fund. So when we're transferring that money out for, say, personnel or whatever, is that because we have to because they're related to the utility, or is that just a mechanism that we've used to fund those resources?
So are you speaking more to the part where we're doing like transfers to the general fund for overhead types of things?
Correct.
That is based, so I don't know the answer to your question, but what I would say is that's based on some information and work that the Policy and Budget Department has done about how much each department pays to the other departments for the work that they've been doing. So the utility fund is paying for the overhead such as city attorney's office and city manager's office and HR. I don't know the answer to whether or not we're required to, but adding to the list.
No, that's good information, and I totally understand, and I've seen us kind of do that with the budget where we decide and allocate, and in most situations that makes sense. I think most businesses do that. Like even in my world in IT, a lot of times if I buy a laptop for accounting, that money will get allocated to their budget. But I would be curious to know what the rules around it, because if we're looking at creative ways to say we don't want to take money out of this that we have to pay for and rates are tied to it, it would be interesting to know if those things have to be, or if that is just a good practice that we've followed. And you're right, it's a common practice to do that. It looks like Don maybe has a.
Don might know.
I think I do, Counselor, but we've got the city attorney with us this evening, and I'm going to invite Dave in if he wants to speak to the question of what's required by law. I think that's really the main question you had. I will tell you that Christine can tell you a bit more about the fact, or Max, that we've studied those cost assessments to various parts of the organization, and we're in the process of making some adjustments to those amounts based on that assessment that we did. But Dave, are you prepared tonight maybe to speak a little bit to what's required on the charter or code in this regard?
Thanks, Don. As for the question, I'm thinking about is it whether or not it's possible to ask for a sales tax to pay for a new water plant or project? I'd like to be able to do some research to get you a good answer.
Sure.
Particularly talking to our bond counsel. And as to whether the utility is required to pay for its share of internal services, is that the second question?
Yeah, so in our operations, sometimes we transfer the money out of the utility to pay for somebody who does work that is for the utility. Do those people have to be paid for that way? Because I mean, we're transferring the money out of the utility into the general fund to pay them. What if we didn't transfer that money? Is there an obligation to take that money out of the utility? Because otherwise, I imagine, say it's your salary, we still have to pay your salary. So could we just pay for that out of the general fund? So it's to me, the reason I'm curious is I'm curious if it's a way to do basically to take the money out of the general fund without hitting that 10% that we're only allowed, because that technically isn't, we're taking it out and putting it into the general fund. And that may be something you have to research too, but I've never really thought of it that way till we were looking at that chart, and I'm just curious.
Yeah, and that's one that I'd like to be able to follow up with both the finance team and our outside counsel that's expert in Tabor related.
That's how I know I asked a good question. I mean,
it is a good one.
It takes 3 lawyers and 1 accountant to answer.
that's fine. That's all the
Thank
questions.
you for the good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Dave. Dave Dumont, did you have any more questions, or were those the big ones?
No, right now those were the only things I had. Thank you.
Cool. Catherine?
Yes, so my questions aren't quite as complicated. I won't need 3 lawyers and an accountant, but interesting. I didn't realize that was a measure. So I'm curious as to why do we buy water from one city to give to another? And in doing so, does that cost us extra money, or is that like kind of a wash?
It's a wash. Nice pun.
Okay.
We had actually purchased water from Thornton and delivered to our customers for a number of years. And back in the early 2000s, the city of Brighton was looking for a water supply, and we said we would be willing to be that middle man to provide the water that we were treating, well, we weren't treating it, we were getting it from Thornton already treated, and just pass it through our city to them. So we charge Brighton what we are charged by Thornton. So we're not making any money. It is strictly a pass through.
Okay.
It's interesting that we're a pass-through. I mean, we're not between those two cities in any way. So it feels like the water has to go, like, it's like taking a plane to go to California, but flying to New York first.
Yep. My understanding is that the contract we were in with Thornton, it was, I'm not sure if it was in perpetuity, but it was for a really long time, and we could not extricate ourselves from that contract. We couldn't say, hey, Thornton and Brighton, you guys go talk together. We had to legally stay in the middle of that conversation. Do we want to? Not so much, but we're required to. So for now, we're that middle, you know, why don't you stop in Phoenix on your way to someplace closer?
That's interesting. All right. And then we talked about our debt and our debt going forward, but how long have we had debt in the past? I mean, how long have we been dealing with that?
We've issued debt. I'm sure I only have records going back to 2000. I can talk to our finance team, but I know that I'm pretty sure we've issued debt going back before that. So we can research that and find out how far back have we been issuing debt to pay for projects.
Yeah, I would be really curious about that. It's interesting that I'm just barely grasping the idea that we take debt so that the current people pay, but so do the future people. That was an interesting way to maneuver that. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I've never thought of doing that. And then do we know why the city has to have 50% in savings? I know you said it was in the charter, but do we know why that was set there? Or because it sounds like that isn't what we had to have, but we set it there. And I'm just curious what our thinking was.
So it's not in the charter. It's actually a separate policy altogether. So okay. When I was reading the documents on that, it's I think primarily to make sure that we have sufficient funds and we are good for the payment. It's also designed to spark a conversation. So each time we issue debt, is this something that we can change? And you know, to my knowledge, we've had a little bit of that conversation, but it's not in the charter. It is a policy. And I see Dave pop back on.
I know it seems it might be a good question. I hopefully won't need 3 lawyers and an accountant, but go ahead, Dave.
Thanks. If I could add, Chris, so the rate maintenance covenants that are in our bonds, those contemplate that not only do we have enough set aside to pay for the debt service, but we also have made a commitment to maintain rates and charges for the use of this system that are sufficient to pay for utility operations and maintenance. So the way it's written, the rate maintenance covenant, you have to be able to cover operations and maintenance on the utility plus 110% of debt service requirements on top of that. And that's the one that I'm familiar with. As far as the 106 million total, it's possible that other bond issues have differing levels of rate maintenance covenant coverage. So it might not be 110% on all of them, but it is on at least the ones that I'm familiar with.
Okay, that actually helps a lot. And then you kept saying there were many things we could pull the lever on. I appreciate those gold stars because I was making notes. But if we pulled the lever on those things, do we know it would reduce the rates, and by how much? I guess it depends on how many levers we pull. But I mean, have we figured out that, yes, this will definitely reduce our rates? Is it leading us in the right direction?
So my response to that would be, I mentioned in the presentation that 150% policy is in our rate setting process. And so when we look at rates, that is one of that's one of our levers, excuse me. We want to make sure that we are not busting that 1.5 times coverage. If we reduce that, yes, it would have an impact. I don't know exactly how much because there are so many other variables, but it would have an impact. We would not have to have as much pledged revenue set aside for that coverage. Is it a good idea? That's a different question altogether that I'm just asking right now, because when we talk to the rating agencies, you know, we do a massive presentation to those folks every time we go out to borrow money. And they are very, we get a lot of points for having a very solid financial position. So it's that balance between having a good amount of pledged revenue or cash on hand, and then making sure that that's a balance for our customers as well. So to answer your question, yes, it would have an impact. I can't tell you exactly how much.
Okay. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
And I would actually, Catherine, to go back to what you originally said about that concept of debt, the term for that we use is intergenerational or generational equity. So that equity is spread across several generations. So not only is the person today benefiting, but the people who move in 5 years from now are also benefiting.
So it even has a cool word.
It has a
Very
cool term, more terms.
One I can use to add to my vocabulary. Thank you.
Yeah, yes.
All right, we have questions from Rich and then from Anita. Rich, go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. Can sort through these. As far as transfers into reserves, our rate stabilization reserve fund, is there any, just completely lost that thought. Is there any rules that we have set up for prior councils as far as what that level has to be, what the cap is on that, and then how that's distributed?
Absolutely. That's so if you think back to that one slide that had the 3 big sections of the water fund, that's off to the far right. So the next part of the conversation would be about revenues. The third part of the conversation would be about reserves. Like Heather mentioned, I'm not sure we're going to get to that tonight, but yes, there are definite, it's a policy that was adopted by City Council in 2006, and there are some maximums and minimums and disbursement requirements to go along with that.
Okay, well, I'll wait on the details on that till we get to reserves. And some of these questions are for farther down that line too. So I'll pass the rest of my time along.
Great, thanks, Rich. Whole bunch of slides on reserves. You're gonna love it, maybe. All right, Anita, what questions do you have?
Thanks. And actually, Councilor Scully kind of talked about this a little bit. It was on the city debt policy. So understanding that we have a city debt policy that it goes beyond what our bondholders' requirements are, I would like to get a firm grasp on how helpful, is there a quantitative number, or do we know how much that has helped us with our bond ratings? So I think for each one of these gold stars where we have an opportunity, it would be really nice to understand very specifically what the trade-offs are. You know, we might be able to have this much more wiggle room with rates, but it makes us much more vulnerable, or really not that much more vulnerable, because all they need is what they require. So that is one question, and I don't expect you to answer it now, but maybe that could be a follow-up answer. Because while we can do something, it doesn't necessarily mean we should, that the return on impact, I guess, is worth it. I noticed, as it sounds like a bunch of my colleagues did, you know, that portion of the pie that was transfers to the general funds. And I thought this might be a good opportunity to kind of, there's been questions that have been percolating throughout the community, and really almost more theories that somehow we have raised water rates to make up for revenue shortfalls from the loss of boating at Stanley Lake, and so money's getting transferred into Parks Rec's budget, or to pay for our downtown, or or to pay for affordable housing. And so while we talked about the Tabor constraints about money coming in, it had been my understanding, and perhaps incorrectly, that there were also constraints about money going out into the general fund. Could we talk a little bit about that kind of constraint as far as due to Tabor and it being an enterprise fund, how those dollars are required to be spent, and how they can and can't be spent?
So we have exhausted my knowledge of what can be used going out. So I think that's a question that we can write down. If Dave Frankel jumps back on and answers it, that's great. Otherwise, we'll keep track of that, and we can get back to you about that one. I do not know the answer.
Can you answer in broad strokes, have we been using money from the utility to pay for affordable housing, parks and recs, lost revenue from Stanley Boats, or to pay for our downtown?
No, to all of those, in my knowledge. I mean, once it gets to the general fund, I don't know how it gets allocated from there, but that's not anything that I've seen was, here's a line item, please make this payment. No.
Max,
So there was a portion.
Max Kirschbaum, want to take a run at your question as well, if you don't mind. Max, go ahead.
Yes, if I could just add a little bit onto that. The purpose of those transfers, remembering that the utility is an enterprise, therefore it has to cover all its costs. So the best example I could think of is, let's say IT. The utility doesn't have its own IT department. We use the city's IT department. The transfers that we make to IT, for example, are specifically to cover our utility costs in IT. Those funds are watched very carefully. They are used specifically and only for those purposes where services are provided to the utility. That's a great one. HR would be another one. Dave Frankel's office is another. We use both inside and outside, inside city attorney's office and outside counsel. So they are covered pretty well. And the study that both Don and Chris referred to is a study that we had commissioned a little over 2 years ago by an entity who does this very thing with cost allocation for cities and counties all over the state. And I have a very high degree of confidence that we have nailed down those costs accurately going out of the utility to other services. Thanks.
Thanks, Max.
And then I guess the second part of my question there is kind of the converse is true as well. My understanding is different departments that utilize public works and utilities, such as parks and recs being a big user of our water, they pay for that. So they pay into the system similarly to this. Is that accurate?
Yes, the parks pays for their water. There are a lot of cities where that doesn't happen, and we are a city where that does happen.
Yeah, so between those are really my main question, is understanding the specific impact if we were to change the city debt policy, what that would have on our rating, and also, would our finance director feel comfortable with that? Like, I would love personally to see that staff memo, if we could find it, from when 2011 that former council chose to make that the policy. What were the founding principles that they were given, and that led to that decision? So it would be helpful before we tinker too much to understand the costs and benefits. So thanks.
That's a fun research project. Fantastic. Okay, Catherine, you have one more question?
Well, it's actually, it's a follow-up to Anita's question. And so when we were talking about the enterprise, we said that we have to set rates and fees enough to cover the costs of the enterprise. So what if we collect more, an additional money that we don't need? Do we give that back to the residents, or do we, what happens to it?
Under the enterprise scenario where we are running as we usually do. Mm-hmm. So when we collect more money than we spent, that trickles down in a calculation process to the reserve accounts. So those are our again, looking at that slide in my head, on the right-hand side, after we talk about revenues, we talk about reserves. So we have reserves to manage the variability of weather and the need to continue capital projects. So we have 2 reserves, and we'll probably not be talking about those tonight, but we'll be talking about those at the next meeting.
Okay.
But there is a process in place to manage that.
Mm-hmm. So council, several of you have asked questions and had some observations along the way. Want to give anybody else, John, Lindsay in particular, if you have a reflection or a takeaway from that first part, now be the time. Otherwise, if you're good, we can carry on. John, you're good. Lindsay?
We can carry on. I'm gathering my questions.
Fantastic. I waited till your mouth was full of something delicious. Sorry about that. All right, Chris, now we get to talk about revenues.
We'll talk about revenues. So we have revenues as the central part of it. We talked about expenses between Julie's presentations and right now. Revenues include rates and fees, tap fee sales, debt proceeds, and then miscellaneous revenues. So the water fund has three primary revenue sources. Some of you have seen this graphic before, this picture before, the bucket. We have rates, we have tap fees, and we have debt funds. Each one of those has a star above it because they are things that you have the control to change. We do have some miscellaneous fees, but we're going to be talking primarily about those two larger items. So I told you I stole some slides from Drew's presentation, and the next several slides are from the Conservation and Efficiency Plan update. So this will be familiar. We have about 33,000 accounts in our city, and the vast majority of those, about 95% of those, are single-family residential accounts. So you'll see that on the left-hand side. And then we have about 6 other categories of customers to whom we serve water. So we have multifamily customers, commercial customers, municipal and public customers, irrigation customers, and then our wholesale customers. The reason we have some different customer types, why not just have customers as a blanket type, just one type, is that we in the city look at our customers in a different way. Hang on a second, I'm having some technical difficulties. Okay, so we have different types of customers because they are charged different rates depending on their use of water. So our single family residential customers, as you saw in Drew's presentation, and you'll see again in a second, use water very differently from commercial customers or from municipal customers, or for that matter, from multifamily customers. And just fun fact, we deliver about 6 billion gallons of water to our customers on an annual basis. So billion with a B, it's a lot of water. So again, a slide you have seen before. Along the bottom is the months of the year, and along the left axis are water use in gallons. And we are a peaking utility. So Drew mentioned this on Monday. We are a utility that is set up and has to be designed to provide water to the customers in the middle of July at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock in the morning who want to irrigate their lawns. So that blue dotted line shows you the total amount of water that our customers use in a pattern. You can see it starts up in May, goes real high up in July, August, September, and then starts coming back down in the fall. That yellow line right underneath the blue dotted line is our single family residential customers again. And then you can see that the rest of our customers have a pretty consistent and smooth profile, except for the irrigation customers who you see a bump basically between June and September. So going forward, I'm going to talk about just our single family residential customers because they are 95% of our customer base, and they're the ones from whom we've been hearing about concerns about water rates. So a reminder again that with our residential customers, 50% of their use is outside. Another thing, when we talk to customers, when they're calling in, I think I have a leak, or we see a leak and we let them know they have a leak, we tell them first place you want to look is your toilet. That is the biggest water user in your house. Please look at replacing those parts because that likely is where your leak is coming from. But you can see the allocation of water throughout the inside of the house. Leaks are a part of that. So how do we bill our customers? And we talked a tiny bit about this during the presentation of meters in the last meeting. Stephen Gay covered that. We'll go into that a lot more in depth right now. So for our residential customers, we bill their water use based on 1,000 gallon units called KGALs. And they are distributed into 3 tiers, our tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 is up to 6,000 gallons, and that currently is charged at $3.96 per 1,000 gallons. Tier 2 is the next 14,000 gallons, so $8.15 for those 1,000 gallons. And then Tier 3 is water use over 21,000 gallons at $12.88. Again, you see the gold stars. That's a lever you can pull, whether or not we base on 1,000 gallon units, and then what's in the tiers and how much we charge for the tiers. to take a snapshot look at what a single family customer's summer water use looked like this summer in July. So to give you some context about who our customers are and how they use water, along the bottom axis, you'll see water use in 1,000 gallons, and along the left, how many customers. So in July of this year, 23% of our customers never got out of tier 1. 56% of our customers never got out of tier 2, and then 21% of our customers were in tier 3, and that's just for the month of July. So that kind of tells you who our customers are and how they use water, especially in July. So how does that look over the course of the whole year, and where are these customers in the city? I'm going to show you a really busy slide, but I will walk through it with you. So for single family residential customers, what does their annual use look like? So on the bottom left, you see the roller coaster chart, and that's total annual water use for customers. And this is basically how we have defined our customers. Our lower use customers, lower use water customers, are the bottom 25% of the use. Our higher water use customers are the top 25% of the use. And then our average water use customers are those in the middle, the 50%. So where do those people literally live in the city? Here's a map. So the lower water use customers are shown in gray. You can see them here and there throughout the city. The biggest group is the green. That's our average water use customers. And they're obviously also everywhere throughout the city, as are our higher water use customers, who are showing up in purple throughout the city. So that just gives you an idea of water use throughout the city last year. So when one looks at the different tiers, where do you get maxed out? What are the dollar amounts that go along with each tier? So for the first tier, at $3.96, you max out at 6,000 gallons, and that's about $24 for that water use. The next 14,000 gallons are another $114, and then anything over 20,000 gallons is going to get billed at that tier 3 use. And a reminder, again, these are the things that you have control over. So for that average water use customer this past July, used 12,000 gallons at their house. So they maxed out their tier 1, obviously that's only 6,000 gallons. And then they had another 6,000 gallons in tier 2. So their bill just for water use alone was $72.66. So let's take a look at a higher water use person. That person used 31,000 gallons in this billing cycle. So they maxed out tier 1, they maxed out tier 2, and they had another 11,000 gallons in tier 3. So their charge for that 31,000 gallons of water in that billing cycle was $279.54. So what does that look like on a bill, actually? Like, here's what a utility bill looks like with that kind of information. So this is a customer's water utility bill. You can see up at the top, we have our message center, which talks about what's going on in the city, what are some programs we're offering. Shout out that we're still offering our COVID grant program. So if customers are interested in that, please let us know. And on the right-hand side, you'll see I have in a box 31 total, because this bill is actually one where the meter got replaced halfway through their July billing cycle. So you can see across in the middle there where it says service dates. For the first half of their billing cycle, they used 16,000 gallons. Their meter was replaced. And for the second half of that billing cycle, they used 15,000 gallons for a total of 31,000 gallons. So the slide before showed you the breakout. Right here in the big red circle, it shows you how it looks on their bill. So starting from top to bottom, they paid their last bill. Thank you. They paid their meter service charge. That's $13.05. That's a fixed fee that we charge to residential customers every month. You can see where the tiers are broken out for that 31,000 gallons. Their sewer bill is on here as well, and that's based on their average winter consumption. Their stormwater management fee, and then the infrastructure fee, which goes towards streetlights and concrete, is on here as well. So you can see how 31,000 gallons shows up on a customer's utility bill. So we had, I believe some of you ask, and definitely some people in the community ask, is it possible that somebody would have a $1,000 water bill, and how is that possible? So here is a bill from somebody who actually had an $1,800 water bill. In the small circle on the right, you can see that they used 148,000 gallons of water during their July billing cycle. And the breakdown shows up in the red circle. So tiers 1 and 2 max out on those, and they had an additional 128,000 gallons that showed up in tier 3. So yes, some customers did have large bills. Some customers use a lot of water. So how does this translate to revenue? We're going to come back now to all of the customer classes, not just the residential customers. It's a very colorful slide. My intent here was to show you two different groups of people. So anybody in a blue shade is one of our customers, and anybody in a yellow-orange shade is one of our contract customers. So at the very bottom there, you'll see this is from 2009 through 2019. The dark blue is our residential customers, all of our residential customers, single family, attached homes, detached homes, multifamily. We do have residential irrigation in there. That very light blue is our commercial customers and our public customers and our irrigation customers. That little skinny line, which should be purple because it represents reclaimed, is actually blue. And then that fixed monthly fee that I referenced in the bill on the slides before is that dark blue. And then on top of that, you have our wholesale contract with Federal Heights. That's in the lemon yellow color. And then the Thornton Brighton pass-through contract that shows up in the orange. It didn't actually go into effect until 2010, which is why you don't see it on 2009. So that's how all of our rates translate into revenues. So a question from all of you, are water rates the same as the city's cost to produce water? And if not, what are the elements that drive or determine water rates? And if so, what infrastructure costs are in there as well? So our rates are driven by a combination of current and future debt service, current and future operating expenses, and current and future CIP projects. So we are including today and tomorrow for our rates. We are planning ahead. Here is a chart of our water rates going back to the year 2000. So you can see along the bottom are the years, and along the left are the rates. In the early aughts, we had every other year rate increases. So for 2002, 4, and 6, we had 0% that were preceded by, looks like 7 and 9s. Every year after that was an annual rate increase. And the average is about 5%, and the cumulative is about a little over 100%, actually almost 101%. So when we talk to you and recommend rates to you, usually every other year, we often provide a comparison chart of what our neighboring utilities are also charging. We come up with a standard water use pattern, apply everybody else's rates to that, and then show you a chart. The caveat with that is always that we don't know how other utilities use their money or spend their money or how they get their money. So we're not always sure how accurate it is to say that their rate structure is exactly the same as ours and their expenses are exactly the same as ours, but it gives us a good idea of where we land in the Front Range neighborhood. So we know that most Front Range utilities do have tiers. There's only one, Broomfield, that does not have tiers. They have a flat rate for all of their water use. We survey about 15 to 20 Front Range utilities. The next slide I'll show you demonstrates how they have their tiers set up and at what tipping points they have them. It's an obnoxious slide. It's really busy, but it does show you where a lot of our neighbors land with the tiers. So first we show Westminster to set the bar. So along the bottom is the number of gallons before you hit a tier, or excuse me, the number of gallons in a tier. And along the left-hand side is the price of the water in that tier. So you can see for Westminster, our first tier is just under $4. Our second tier is just over $8, and our third tier is just under $13, and that's for everything from 20,000 gallons on up. So when I load in everybody else, very busy, you can see that there are some that are higher than us and obviously some that are lower than us. So I'll walk through these. You don't have to squint and try to figure it out. There are a couple that are pretty close together at the very top on the right, and the very top one is Louisville in green, and they seem to have a lot of tiers going on there. The one right under that is Thornton, and the one between Thornton and Westminster is South Adams County Water and Sanitation District. Then underneath Westminster, there are a series of 3, and those are Federal Heights, Superior, and Crestview Water and Sanitation District. There's a dark green line and a few underneath that, and that's Lafayette and North Glen and Longmont. Arvada is that long snaking gray line that goes up to the right. Denver Water is that goldish line in the middle, and then obviously Broomfield is the flat rate at the bottom. So this is not representative of everybody in the Front Range. These are 12 or 13 other utilities in the Northwest metro area. So the next several slides will be what you're used to seeing when we do our rate comparisons. Past what we've done, and I'll show you here, is we've broken those out into those customer types. So the lower water users, the average water users, and then the higher water users. So for 2020 bill comparison, and you usually see the water plus the sewer. This is just water. You can see where Westminster falls with an average of $317. We're underneath that. Our number is $295. For the average water user, and we're looking at 96,000 gallons here compared to the low water user of 34,000 gallons, that average bill is about $600, and we are at about $662. And then for the higher water user, we're using the 150,000 gallons usage. The average water bill is $923, and our bill is at about $1,148. So you can see how that changes for each of those different types of customers compared to our Front Range neighbors. How is water used and metered and billed? So you've seen this slide last time. I won't walk through the whole thing with you again, but if you recall, we bill at 1,000 gallon increments. So that customer who used 6,251 gallons is billed for 6,000, and that 251 travels forward. One of you asked a question about incremental billing. What does it look like if we are charging on 1 gallon increments and not 1,000 gallon increments? So I'll walk through that with you. And yes, there is a slight difference in charging between those two different types of methods. So let's say a customer uses 14,999 gallons. We all know what that looks like. They're billed at 14,000 gallons. That 999 travels forward. The next month, they use 20,001 gallons. So when you add that 999 to that 20,001, you are now in tier 3. So when you combine the bill for the 14,000 and the bill for the 21,000, when you use the 1,000 gallon, the K-Gal method, your bill will be $265.80. If you're billed on single gallon units, your bill would be $261.07. And that difference is the difference in dollar amounts between what we charge for tier 2 and what we charge for tier 3. So yes, there is a slight difference in being charged by per gallon versus per 1,000 gallons. And as I come to the end of this section, I wanted to talk a little bit about the 6 policies that were implemented as far as the conversation with you all went with the 2019 and the 2020 rate process and adoption. So this slide is called Rate Adjustment Components from the 2018 Cost of Service. What is a cost of service? We did a study that literally looks at the cost to serve each of our customers' water. It's good practice for utilities to every 5 to 10 years take a look at what we are charging our customers and are we charging the right amount to the right customer. So we did that effort. We started it in 2017. We wrapped it up in 2018. Found a lot of really interesting information, some of which we brought forward to you as policy direction. And the first one was to align our residential and commercial customers to their cost of service. So we discovered as a part of the study that our residential customers were not paying quite what it cost them to serve, what it costs to serve them water. And our commercial customers, were paying more than it costs to serve them water. And so our recommendation to you was to start realigning and rebalancing those rates so that we could make sure we were fairly and equitably charging our customers the right thing. And that was intended to be phased in over a course of 8 years. To flash cut the rates on that would have been very significant and would not have been realistic. One of the things that staff recommended was broadening tier 1 from 4,000 gallons to 6,000 gallons. So we bumped tier 1's allocation up by 50%, recognizing that 4,000 gallons might not be enough for the average customer for their indoor water use. And so we wanted to make sure that they had access to more water at that lower tier 1 rate. We simplified the commercial water use tiers. We previously charged commercial rates based on meter size, which was not a great way to do it. It was confusing and not accurate, and so we simplified that to 1 tier. And in addition to that, we implemented, you all adopted a policy that said, okay, if you use more water than you bought access to, we're going to surcharge you. When commercial customers, well, when any customer buys access to our system, they pay a tap fee, and they are allocated a certain amount of water as part of that. So for commercial customers, if they use more water than they were allocated, we charge them more. Number 4, we enhanced our fixed water revenues. So you remember a few slides back, I mentioned the meter service charge. That's charged every month to all of our customers based on their meter size. And that is a fixed component. So no matter what the weather is, how much water customers use, this charge, this fee goes towards things like the billing system, the billing staff, meter reading, and our meter shop, and a bunch of fixed maintenance costs. So that is a fixed component of our revenues, which are largely variable due to weather. One of the things that, again, going back to the conversation and the discussion about rating agencies and how our financial position looks, rating agencies value a strong, fixed, and stable revenue source for a utility. So in 2018, that meter service charge, that meter service fee, represented about 13% of our overall revenues. And the goal is to get that to 20% over a period of time, again, 8 years. Numbers 5 and 6 are more for the wastewater side of the equation, but I'll mention them here because they're part of the overall package that we brought to you back then. Maintaining a single sewer rate. So if you recall from Julie's conversation, our wastewater goes to 2 different places depending on where you live. If you live north of 92nd Avenue, it goes up to Big Dry, our own wastewater treatment plant. If you live south of 92nd, it goes to the Metro plant. That's a regional plant for the Front Range. There are different costs associated with each of those treatment facilities, but what we asked of City Council and City Council adopted was let's maintain our single sewer rate. We had been doing that for years. We wanted to, again, affirm that with you all, but it makes it consistent for city customers, no matter where they live, to have one single sewer rate. And then finally, we implemented a 2,000-gallon monthly minimum readiness to serve wastewater charge, which acts very similar to that monthly water fixed revenue piece. The wastewater plant is there 24/7, 365. It is ready to serve customers at any time. We wanted to have a more stable revenue source, knowing that, and you saw this on Monday night, our customers are continuing to use less water, which is great from a conservation standpoint, but from a revenue standpoint, that gets a little bit challenging. Again, these are starred because you have the opportunity to pull that lever. So as I come to the end here, this is my second to the last, actually, this is my last slide for this section. You see a whole bunch more things that we have the opportunity to change. So these are levers that you can pull in addition to the expenses levers. There are rate structure changes you could make. You can change the volume of water use in each tier. You can change the price per tier. We can look at a 30-day billing cycle. I know that was something that was brought up last time and sounds like it's very interesting. We could do gallon-based billing as well. I spoke at the very beginning when I was talking about the how are rates done slide about water affordability. And so some conversations with you about what does affordability mean to each of you. And then continuing those 6 policies, you know, we were looking at getting our customers back in balance over a course of 8 years. You certainly have the option to pull that lever and make some changes where you'd like. So now I will turn it back to Heather.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Catherine, I saw that you had a question there early on. Do you recall what it was? And then we'll go to Anita when you're done.
I do. So I love that you showed us some examples of bills. When I was doing my own research and I looked at about 25 cities across the United States and in Colorado combined, I noticed that some of those cities actually post copies of, you know, of course names are left off, but bills, and they explain what each section means. And I think that might be very helpful to our residents. And then I like that tier slide you showed too. I like anything that shows where we are in comparison to other cities. I like those posted on the internet because we hear that a lot. Oh, we're the most expensive city, I think I heard someone say, in all of the country. Well, that's simply not a true statement. So I would like to be able to dispel those kind of statements. I understand our rates are high, but let's put them into a true statement and maybe show our residents where we actually sit compared to other cities, and then maybe a little explanation of why we chose those cities to compare ourselves to, because most of our residents compare us to our local 9 cities in the metro area, and some of those are not equitable cities to be comparing ourselves to because we're larger or they're larger, or they have a different type of system than we do. So I was just interested in having some of that posted on our internet for our residents to be able to view as well. I really enjoyed the breakdown that you did by gallon, by 1 gallon, versus if we charge thousands of gallons. I thought that was really good. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Anita?
Thanks. When you were showing us earlier on the first section, you kind of had the section on how you determine the water rates, and then you go through an affordability analysis. Are we going to talk about that at a later time, or are we going to? Can I ask about that now? Where does that fold in, and how do you accomplish that?
So that's more of a conversation topic with you all. We don't have any more slides about affordability. What I mentioned earlier, I'll say again, is that we do our own internal review of what affordability looks like. We use different metrics. Either, the EPA has their own way of doing things. We look at that. S&P, one of the rating agencies, has their own way of looking at things. And then there's a professor out of Texas A&M who has a really unique way of looking at minimum wage and hours worked that we use that. But I think when it comes to affordability, it might be helpful to understand what each of you defines as affordable, because we're looking at a couple of different ways, but we don't know what your thoughts are. So no slides going forward, conversation topic.
Well, I'd actually push back a little bit on that. So I think it would be really helpful for us and for our residents right now to know what those internal conversations and metrics for affordability were. So that can be a follow-up. Like, I don't expect you to be able to rattle it all off right now, but I think I would guarantee you there are people who don't believe that was part of the equation at all, or that effort was put into that. And so even myself, who's been on council, by the time we get the proposal, you guys have already gone through that analysis. So it's not something I've been exposed to prior. So I think it's really, I think it's worthwhile information to maybe follow up on for us. And I think as we have our discussions, that gives us really kind of an anchor point for the conversation, because I doubt any of us on our own have that same like systemic or way of calculating that, like a formula for calculating it. We have more of a gut feel. I had asked this, I believe, Public Works staff ages ago. I think it was honestly maybe 2018 when we did this. But Xcel Energy has a way of kind of letting you have an average monthly bill. And so looking at your past year's usage to level it off. So a lot of folks, live kind of month to month, and having spiky bills while over the course of the year they have the bandwidth or capacity for that, it can make the summer months really difficult, because you're getting you get a higher air conditioning bill. And so Xcel Energy recognized that and figured out a way to level fund it. I'd really like to see if that's a program. I mean, I know I'm jumping ahead. Sorry, Heather, don't get a ruler out or something, but that is something that I've been thinking about. And then if we could go back to the previous slide that had the list with all the stars. I had a quick question. How tied are our existing debt obligations to our current rate structure? My understanding is basically the way that we're able to prove out the revenue that we have to pay those bonds is through the rate structure that we have. And so while we can change all of that, I would imagine there's some caveats to those stars.
So revenue requirements.
So if we were to say we're just going to be exactly like Broomfield, let's put our rates just at Broomfield, I would imagine we would have a difficulty hitting our bond obligation.
So the slide that we showed early on, that was the, what does it cost to serve 1,000 gallons to customers? that would be our version, I would think, of the flat rate. So if we were going to, it would be very difficult for us to have the same dollar amount rate as Broomfield and meet our operating debt service and CIP obligations. I mean, first things first, we got to pay to operate the utility. Second thing is we got to pay back the debt that we borrowed. I mean, we borrowed the money, we got to pay it back. That leaves the capital program to change.
So essentially, to accommodate the 21%, I think, that were in the that hit that third tier, 75% of our residents would have to see an increase in their what they typically pay.
If you were going to change the tiers
to a flat, just let's say get rid of tiers, we go to a flat, that would force my understanding of what you just said, and I'm just repeating it back so you can tell me if I got it completely wrong. But right now, by having tiers, it's allowing us to have a lower than the cost to provide 1,000 gallons of water to folks because that maybe use mainly for indoor or use moderate pricing, and those folks that are using more, kind of, you know, it's a closed system, so they are helping have the maybe retirees on a fixed income that are really mindful of what they're spending and using a lower rate. Is that accurate?
Yes. If I can say back, because there was a lot there. You were saying a lot there, and I'm trying to keep track of it. I
apologize.
Got a couple of things in there about a flat rate, and so to speak to that point, that has some pros and cons, and I think we can talk about those when we get to the policy discussion and the meeting on the 15th. But that does have some pros and cons. Pro, you know, it's a cheaper dollar amount for everybody. Cons, you might be subsidizing somebody else's water use. You know, we have tiered rate structures to send a conservation signal, so conservation might not be as important then. But
okay, yeah, no, I'm just for clarity. I've heard a lot of people wanting to get rid of tiers, and I think that they've helped affordability for the lower water users, and it's more appropriate because. Well, I have my opinions, but we're not supposed to be talking about opinions. We're just asking here. So, so I think those are my main questions after looking at this. I just, again, really want to reiterate all of these stars. I think it would be helpful for us to talk about the cost benefit of each one of them, you know, and I know that's kind of what you've just done, but I'm nervous about tinkering without understanding what happens on the other end of the scale.
And it may be that what needs to happen in December is you all identify which ones you're most interested in pursuing, and let's stat and say, you know, what would happen if we did for here to here? And so give them something more to hone in on to bring you a better sense of the trade-offs, as opposed to generic trade-offs of, you know, more is more and less is less. So that we don't send them on a total goose chase. We can maybe
absolutely, yeah, understand that. Cool. My last question, and it's not something I've heard addressed, was a little bit around equity. So in Westminster, we do have some homes, particularly in the southern portion of our community, that are really modest sized homes but have large lot sizes. And I know other communities look at our budgets. And is that something that we've ever considered, so that you don't perhaps penalize people who purchased a home prior to our water rates going up, and now this has become cost prohibitive, and you know, that is something I'm just wondering about, that equity lens in rating. How do we fold that in to make sure we're not unduly burdening any of our community members?
We haven't looked at that specifically. That's definitely something that I've been thinking about and our team has been thinking about. And for anybody who's not familiar with that term, a water budget is a budget of water that is set for you at your home. So that there are a couple of front range utilities that use that, but it's a specific budget just for you and not one size fits all.
Interesting.
So something that we could definitely consider going forward.
Put it on the ideas list. Fantastic. Anything else, Anita? Cool. All right. John, what do you got for me?
Just a few, I have just a few general questions kind of related to the slide deck. Christine, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it a lot. How often do we perform affordability analysis? And is it always internal, or do we bring in outside counsel occasionally?
We have typically done that during the rate recommendation process. So as we're going through with rate recommendations, we'll take a look at the 3 metrics that we use to see how things look. We have not yet brought in anybody to do that work. Certainly open to doing that.
Okay, thank you. If doing the per gallon is easier to track, it looks like it was slightly in your slide less expensive by a few dollars, but let's just say less expensive and easier for a customer to track. Why aren't we doing that? Is it due to the meters we have, or what reasons do we have for not already doing that?
We've billed on 1,000-gallon units forever, as do most of the front range utilities. So this is kind of one of those, because we've always done it that way, answers.
What if we switch to a gallon? Is that really a burden on staff if we go that route?
I don't know. We can check into that. I did ask the meter shop. It sounded like it's an option, but we can certainly come back and let you know that yes, this is something we can do. It would take a little bit for the billing system folks to manage, but I certainly get back to you on that one.
Because for me, it was somewhat when Stephen Gay put the slide out that, you know, you may have 1,099, that 999 transfers to the next month, and I think then you can see a significant spike in your from 1 month to the next, which is something we want to avoid. So I think we really want to look at that. That would be my suggestion. And then on billing, the 30-day cycle, I would at some point, are we going to talk more about that? Why some people, I think it threw people into another tier, it would be my guess, but I don't know that much about it. And why would we not be on a 30-day billing cycle, or, you know, a monthly cycle versus, I think we saw some that were 32, 33, and then it threw them into the next tier. And then they saw a spike in their bill. So I guess my question, I'm kind of new at this, but how do we avoid that? Because that seems kind of scary to me.
It is something that we've had for a bit of time, is my understanding, based on back in the day when you had staff going out and checking all those routes. We had to take into account holidays and weekends and time off. And so we gave ourselves in some buffer. So a billing cycle can be between 27 and 33 days. I don't know what challenges there would be to move to a 30-day standard cycle. I would think that we could probably do that, but we can certainly look into doing that. And that's, again, one of those levers that you all have the ability to pull.
I want to learn more about that, because that's a lever I think might save us some grief at times. And then just a general question. You had put up a bill of a family who had 140,000 gallons of water in 1 month. That's a lot. What is the average? So was that July or August or something like that? July. So what's the average similar, you know, what's the average for Westminster? So that's 140,000. That almost seems like for like my household, an entire year's worth of water they use in 1 month. What's the average of Westminster in July?
About 12 to 15,000 gallons.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that answer. That just seems so significantly different than what the average homeowner would use. I feel for the people if they use 140,000, but I can't imagine why they would. I mean, it just seems.
There are customers who have really large yards, and even if, you know, a lot of our customers have very large yards and are watering efficiently, they just have a lot of grass to water. So, you know, they're the customers who have efficient watering of a lot of lawn, and there are customers who we call over irrigators, and we let them know every year, hey, you're using a lot of water, you don't need to use so much, your grass is going to be fine if you use half that. So
those were my questions. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Lindsay.
Thank you. I have several questions, so please bear with me now. I hear this occasionally about how, and I know that staff has said that it's hard to know the valuation of other cities and their maintenance costs versus ours. So I hear quite often, on occasion, not often, how we can be selling wholesale water at a reduced price to Federal Heights, and we're paying more than what Federal Heights is. So can you please kind of speak to that as far as why?
So we have a contract with Federal Heights to provide them water in perpetuity. So we are their major water source. Their contract was renegotiated back in the early aughts, and their rate was tied to our rate increases. We provide them water at a meter. We actually have 3 meters for them, and then past that, it is up to them to deliver that water to their customers. So the costs that go into providing Federal Heights water are not so much of the distribution system as for the rest of the internal customers.
And do we treat their water for them?
Yes.
Okay. Because is there any, I didn't see that in the slides, but is there any way council can maybe further look into that as an option to have adjustments to?
We could reopen the contract with Federal Heights. That's certainly an option. That's certainly an option.
Okay. So looking at the current, the rates and the structures that you provide us as far as current and the future operating expenses, the current and the future CIP projects, and the current future debt service, has this always been part of our rate structure on how we develop rates across over time?
Since I have been here for 15 years, yes. What we look at is, again, like you mentioned from the slide, we're looking at now and into the future. Our goal from the staff perspective is to provide a rate recommendation that is more smooth and not roller coastery. So we look at what those projects are in the future and try to manage how to pay for those as we go.
Okay, so is it understandable then that there seems to be a disconnect, that we were always planning for future projects, but within the last, I guess, rate increase 2 years ago, that there was what seemed to be dire need from staff to say, we got to pay for our system, it's 50 years old. So if we were always planning for that and it has always been part of the rate structure, I'm curious as to why we felt that we needed to restructure to pay for an aging system, if you will.
So when I started working on this about 10 years ago, we had a different way of assessing our infrastructure system than we do now. And so that has definitely changed in the last decade. Julie has been doing that work. Her predecessor started that work, and we've taken a look at what needs to happen going forward. The CIP program 15 years ago is vastly different from what it is now. So in addition to the fact that we have more and better information, we also have some things that are hitting right now that we could push off. We might not be able to push off, and there are some large costs. The Water 2025 program, our replacement for the Semper plant, is one of those.
Okay.
And Lindsay, Max wanted to add a little bit more in case it's helpful to you. Max, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thanks. I kind of like to maybe refer you back to, I think it was the question slide that was very early in tonight's presentation, where it was a question that had been given to us in this process. And in that answer, we said that if you look at the last 10 years worth of capital investment, you'll know that our CIP has accounted for about $30 million per year, water plus wastewater combined. And then there was another footnote on that same answer that said, in a $4 billion asset system, that's less than 1% per year. So in 2018, when we brought the recommendations forward, it's not that we weren't previously aware of all of these requirements. It was an opportunity for us to say, if we continue at this rate of 30-ish million a year, that utility condition index is only going to continue to go down, and we need to start making move in the other direction. So that the rate, which includes the CIP, is reflective of that recommendation to a need to do a little bit more on CIP than we have been doing. That's the key there.
Thanks, Max.
Okay. So on that same level of thinking, then there's also a disconnect between why we placed a moratorium in 2018 when we said that the sewer capacity was increasing, I think, what, 30–40%. So can you speak to that then, as far as we need to increase our rates to maintain our
Yes.
infrastructure, but
Sure.
we also have a moratorium that we need to place.
Yeah, very, very different kind of an issue there. But when we said that there is a 40% increase in flow in the interceptor, that turned out to be a very accurate statement. When we did the survey and the pre-design work on the interceptor sewer, the interceptor sewer is a series of pipes between 15 inches and 54 inches that have over 22 miles total of pipe. So there are segments within those 22 miles, all different size pipe, that were in fact had shown a 40% increase in flow. That doesn't mean every pipe did, because they're all different size, they're different length, they're different location. And where the project that we will be bringing you shortly, the part 2 of the Big Dry Creek Interceptor Sewer Project for a contract award, will in fact add a parallel sewer where it's most needed to make sure that we are meeting the capacity needs for today and into the future. So that's an example where a majority of the money we're going to spend on that total work is age and condition related. There is always, almost always, a component of projects of that size that allow us the opportunity to address capacity as well. That's a perfect example of it.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna chew on that for a little bit. So based on what staff says and looking at this slide here, council really does have some liberties as far as where we can adjust, not only to cover our rates, but to potentially lower or cover our costs, excuse me, but potentially lower the rates. And really it can be up to a creative structure on both council and staff as far as what we set. So much to that end, if the tiered system has roots in conserving water, I believe the tiers should be based on a user lot size, and then the tiers could be attached to each user or customer, but that would allow us to then maybe use some creativity in the meters. Is that something that could potentially be looked into as far as based on customer, not necessarily the tiers itself?
So help me understand a little bit better what you're asking, because what I think I heard was, can we do budget-based structure for customers? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
because so yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Heather.
Based on lot size, right? That was specifically what you were saying.
Yes, based on lot size.
That is an option. We can certainly look at that as a rate structure. Okay.
Because I feel that and we've heard this a lot, that a lot of people say it's unaffordable, and it's unequal as far as how we're structuring these tiers. And so I would like to, not tonight, but just, I believe it's in the next session or the next, to potentially look at how we can better structure a system that would provide more equality as far as water usage, if that makes sense. So That's all my questions for right now. So thank you for your time and answering those. But this has been helpful so far. So thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Lindsay, we have a follow-up question from Dave and then from Catherine and Council. I am just mindful of the time that we're pushing up against our 8 o'clock. So we'll go until your questions are done and then we'll wrap it up for tonight. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so this is actually my first questions for this one. Or maybe I asked too many questions if you think this is follow-up.
Oh, no, you're right. You're right. You did. Sorry. No, go ahead.
So a couple quick questions. One, you had mentioned on the, the example of the $7 and some odd cents per 1,000 gallons that you showed. Is that the actual cost if we went? Because just you had said a comment a little bit ago about if that was a flat fee when Anita was asking about what it would look, or making sure that we would still be able to meet our bond requirements. Was that $7 based off of that? Because I've asked in the past what it would look like if we only had 1 or 2 tiers. So I don't know if you can, and you may not be able to answer that with the debt requirements, but I would be interested in seeing what that actually is and validated, this is what that would look like. Because Anita had a good point, maybe that's not the best way to do it, but it would be nice to know what that option would look like. Mm-hmm. I think, some of my other quick questions. So when you showed the split between, like, say, industrial and commercial and residential, a residential was 1 bucket. So I assume that that includes multifamily versus single family. Is it possible for us to see both buckets, to see them separately, so we knew how much was going into multifamily and we knew how much was going into residential? Because I would be interested to see that. So it's probably not something you're going to be able to show right now. And then on wastewater, because we have seen those charts, is that, I don't remember seeing that chart tonight unless I missed it, but is that one we'll see in a future presentation for wastewater? Yeah.
Yep, that's we'll finish up this presentation. I've got about 30 more slides for the next one, and then we'll go into wastewater. So tonight was all water, next meeting is all wastewater.
Perfect. Yep. And then the only other thing that I wanted to kind of bring up when we're starting to look at tiers, because I'm surprised in some of those cities, I think it was Erie, had so many different tiers. That's but I am curious, if you went the opposite direction from just 1 flat rate, if you carved out another tier and dropped that 3rd tier or something like that, to be creative. And obviously, you probably have to play around with that with some different options to see what that would look like. I am concerned when we look at the split that almost 1/4 of our city is in that top tier. If you look at it was something like 21 or 23% of the percentage. So I did find it very useful to see how it's plotted out, and it's really sporadic. I mean, I think one of the things that recently was brought up to me that I hadn't heard before, and I wanted to at least make it a point for my colleagues to think about. It's not always just grass. There's some people, especially right now, that grow their own food throughout the summer. So, specifically in the historic part of the city where they have some of those large lots, and that agricultural is more of a thing. And some of it's by demographic too. Some cultures that's, very standard. So I have heard some recent people bring up to me the fact that those people are being hurt by this, and they normally would be saving money on growing their own food, but because of the water component, that could hurt them. So maybe between the budget idea that you had kind of thrown out, and is that kind of the same thing as we had talked in previous meetings about the way that they do utility billing with electricity? Is that budget billing the same kind of thing you're talking about, where they say, here's what you're going to spend in a year, and they spread it across the bills? Because I know, like, Excel does that, where they'll say, we're gonna guess what you spend off of a previous year, then we're going to charge you at this flat rate all the way across the year. And we've brought that up. I don't remember who brought it up. Somebody brought it up in another meeting. Is that the same thing that Anita was talking about tonight?
I think so.
Okay.
Just make sure. So average water billing, like Excel does with power, is the same thing as a water budget based on lot size? I don't think those are the same thing.
No, the lot size is what Lindsay was talking about. I was pretty sure well, I was pretty sure what I was following Anita talk about was the same thing that the Excel does, and I wasn't 100% following you, so I'm not sure it wasn't. I wanted to clarify that that's what you meant.
Dave, this is Max. Could I pop in here? These are, even though that word budget was used twice, it's two different things that we're talking about. There is a budget billing, which is just leveling your budget, leveling your bill over the course of a year, and then you true it up at the end of the year if you're above or below it. That's one way that word was used tonight. Another way it was used tonight, though, is there is it's difficult, it's very complicated, but there is a methodology of establishing rates that are tailored to the customer. That's what Chris said earlier. You would tailor it to the individual. And while I do think that idea has good merit, it's probably not a short-term project. That's a long-term effort, but I think it's as an idea, it has a lot of merit.
Well, I appreciate that. I think you pointing out the fact that, you know, one of those might be a long-term thing. I still think it's a good time for us to talk about it, because as I would see it, we would want to look at short-term and long-term solutions, because you know, to the point that we've been talking about, this stuff is aging as soon as you put it in. So we're going to keep hitting this cycle. So however we could flatten that out in the long term and hit more of we're doing, you know, the cost of living kind of increases, because we know where our system is and what we're going to hit every 40 years or 50 years or whatever it is. So let me make sure that's all I had. I had written down some stuff. So nope, that's all I had at this point. So I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Dave. All right, Catherine, you had another one?
Yes, I do.
Be...
So I really appreciate what Dave brought up with the gardening. I think that's what I was trying to allude to on Monday, was that I know many of our residents garden in our city, and it is very costly to be gardeners, which I'm very honest, I'm not a gardener. I did not know that. But in speaking to a horticulturist last week, I learned that there are different ways to garden. And so I really want our city to look at putting some of those different methods. And the one that I'm specifically referring to is called no-dig gardening. It uses less water. It actually, you can garden later into the season and earlier from the season as well. So you get a longer growth season. It was just fascinating. And I asked specifically if it was possible to even do inside, because many of us don't necessarily like to be outside and garden, but I would love to be able to reap the benefits of homegrown tomatoes and cucumbers. So I hope our city will look into that and maybe put that on our webpage, where we keep our conservation tips, our garden in a box, and our turf buyback turf program tips as well. I am trying to understand what billing would look like by lot size. That is unclear to me. So I guess I'm trying to understand that. And I believe Lindsay asked that question or put that idea out there. I'm just curious to know more about it.
I think that's something we have to research and determine together, because we don't currently have that. And so it might be lot sizes between X and Y are charged at this. I'm thinking off the top of my head. Or if you have a lot size under this amount or over this amount, your rate is this. So we can do as staff some research on who else does that. Why reinvent the wheel if somebody else has figured that out? And then how could that be an option for you all to consider?
Excellent. I do want to remind our council that you know, equity is such a valuable piece here. I believe Anita brought it up, and I appreciate her bringing that into the conversation. And that I think it's important to remember that equality does not equal equity. That and the way we worked the rates the last time we looked at them, one of the things that we did that I think was super important is that we increased the units of the gallons the thousands of gallons in tier 1 from 4,000 to 6,000, specifically to help low water users who typically tend to either not own homes or own very small homes, and they do so because that's what they can afford, and we didn't want to overburden. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. So, and just to remember that equity is raising the boats, is raising the water to raise all boats, you know, that it's not about us all paying the same. It's about creating a system that will work for each of us individually to be able to afford to live in this city. So I just wanted to really remind people of that. I don't know where it fits in the conversation yet, but to keep that in mind, that, you know, we have to be thinking of all of our residents, and yes, our people who are using a lot of water but can't afford it, and those who don't use a lot of water but need to keep that usage really down because they can't afford the water. So just really working on that is important. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
Thanks, Catherine. So Anita wanted to jump in, and then I thought maybe we could wrap up with some quick final takeaways that you all might have and get you out of here after a couple other housekeeping things. Anita?
Thanks, Heather, and thanks, Chris, for this really amazing and in-depth presentation tonight. I am a little concerned after that last interchange that somehow my question idea got lost, because clearly Heather hadn't captured it just by what was repeated. So I had two. The first was that Excel level billing idea. The second was asking about water budgets that were based off of actual, like, those kind of relic old properties that we have in South Westminster, where you may have an 800 square foot home on an acre lot. Yep. And so there are other municipalities that set specific budgets. And so for that home, so if you are an aggressive water user, you're still going to get bumped up into a higher tier because you're putting more wear and tear on the system. But if you're doing good conservation practice, you're not penalized for having kind of that legacy home. You purchase that home, and you could even maybe perhaps have time of purchase or something that's in there, understanding that it's kind of a legacy liability that you now have because of how we've changed. So I just wanted to make sure those two questions that I asked were captured. The second thing I wanted to talk about, and I thought tonight we would cover this because it was on revenues and we haven't talked about it at all, were tap fees, right? So there's only a few areas that we get revenues, tap fees being one of them. And so that seems like another item that we could discuss is, do we want to raise, do we as a city council say, listen, we want you to invest in our community. We want you to come do business in Westminster. However, we want to make sure you're paying your fair share. And maybe we have higher tap fees than we do now. So I'm curious when we're going to talk about tap fees. The other thing I wanted to talk about is utilizing the different URAs that we have to finance infrastructure investment, because that is something that we can do through Tabor. I know we're not only talking about water tonight, but I know on the wastewater side, we just did, you know, I think it was 14, it might've been $18 million of investment that is not paid for by the ratepayers because we utilized a URA. Are there opportunities? Is there room with any of our pro formas, within any of our URAs to have that type of investment in our water or wastewater or stormwater systems? So those are other questions I have that I had hoped would be answered tonight. Does that make sense? Or do I need to repeat that? Because I want to make sure, I don't feel like everything's getting captured. So I want to make sure I'm clear.
Well, and I'm smiling because you just did the trailer for the next meeting, because we stopped this meeting at rates. And then the next topic for revenues is tap fees. And then part of one of the questions that you all asked was, are there some creative and innovative ways to generate revenues or diversify revenues? And yes, we'll talk about URAs a little bit in that. So we're already on.
I'm just impatient. That's all. I apologize.
Had to stop it somewhere, so that was a great place to stop. But Anita, I appreciate you reiterating your point, because I did not understand the difference between those two pieces. So thank you for doing that. That was super helpful, at least for me. I might be the only one who didn't catch it. Council, I am again mindful of the time, but I did want to give anyone who hasn't had a chance to say anything, any final reflections, any takeaways that already included in the questions that you asked or the comments that you've already made. Anyone at all want to jump in? Rich, have you said anything that you wanted to say on this topic for tonight?
Nothing to add. The thing that is important to me as a takeaway, though, is there is a significant number of gold stars on there. We just have to evaluate where we can get the best bang for our buck and balance out affordability in different tiers. So we'll continue to look towards that.
Fantastic. Anybody else want to add anything? Dave, go ahead.
I just wanted to welcome Herb. I've noticed behind my chat, he somehow snuck in behind my go to meeting window.
And I'm going to come back to Herb last and see if he how long he's been there and if he had anything to add. Anybody else want to add anything? Fantastic. Herb, you said you were going to join late. I'm not sure how long you've been with us, but did you have any takeaways in what you did here?
I think there's a lot of discussion that's still going on. I'm not sure everybody got the exact answers they wanted, but I think they posed questions. I think there's still a lot to be seen and a lot of decisions that will be forthcoming when this is all said and done. But I've been on for quite a while.
Fantastic. Excellent. So council, as Chris alluded to, you're, I think, probably more than halfway through this presentation, but the wastewater presentation is not quite as long because many of the juicy bits have already sort of been explained. And so that component for the next meeting will be a little bit shorter. So Chris and I are pretty confident that you can pick up where you left off tonight on all those things that Anita just asked about and more, all that stuff on reserves that several of you have been alluding to as well. That will be the finishing up of the water conversation next time, and then there'll be a wastewater slide deck as well. You should continue to do exactly what you're doing now, which is asking questions and then including some ideas like, could we, have we, what about? That's exactly the right kind of thinking to bring to this. And we've captured some, and then I messed some up, and then we fixed some. So I think now we have a good list of the ideas that are on the table so far. We'll keep tracking those. And if you have some, deep thoughts when you're in the shower, driving around, whatever you do your deep thinking, you can send those along if you don't want to save them until the next meeting. Whatever works for you works for us. Chris, I know that you've worked your tail off on this. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the next round with you in a couple of weeks. Council, Max would like to chat with you about a couple of things, and then Herb would like to chat with you about a couple of things, but I think I'm done with you for the evening, and I just want to say thank you very much for your time and your thoughtful questions. I've really learned a lot and enjoy my time with you. So Max, am I good to hop off now and hand it over to you?
Sounds good. Thank you, Heather. Appreciate your effort tonight.
Good night, Council.
I have just a short item for you. I want to keep you abreast of the cost for this outside facilitation that Heather is providing to this effort. Up through the completion of this third segment of 5, we have spent just under $10,000. That does cover a bulk of the work that's already been done for yet the session that lies ahead of us. It is my estimate that we will cap this effort at $15,000 to get through the 5 meetings. It's my intent to continue. We can continue to cover that cost within my spending authority as a department head, but I would cap it at $15,000. That will get us through the next 2 meetings, finish this effort, and then if there are any follow-on work that you wish to continue with, say the public engagement piece, we would address that separately. So that's all I had. I just wanted to make sure you knew where we stood with spending and what was left to do to get through the final 2 meetings of this 5 meetings session.
Max, is there any kind of direction that you need from council tonight, or is this just an informational piece?
It's informational. unless you wanted to stop and go a different direction. I expressed it as my intent is the best thing to do would be continue on with these next 2 sessions, cap the amount, and then consider what follow-on actions you may be interested in the community engagement piece.
Okay. From the standpoint of the interest that's been shown by the council members and the back and forth that Heather's been able to facilitate, my personal recommendation is let's get through the other meetings and then we can do a position check and see where everybody's at. Is there any objection to that from any member of the council? Councilor DeMont?
Just to stay consistent with my position, I still feel that we probably could have done this without outside facilitation. So, but I mean, I was in the minority on that, but I maintain that position.
Anybody else have any comments? Councilor Volt?
So I just want to confirm, when we first agreed to this, we agreed to it up to $10,000, right? And what you're suggesting is adding another 5 for, and that would be for the 1 or 2 extra meetings?
Right. The estimate that was with the scope that Heather originally discussed with you, she did indicate $10,000. We have invested substantial amounts of time to prepare for these. I'm very confident that we are paying a fair rate and we are getting our money's worth up to this point. But it was important to have this conversation because up front, the estimate was $10,000 and we're at that point. I needed to make sure that you knew where we stood before we did anything further to continue through the remainder of the 2 meetings.
Councilor Vols, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Councilor Smith?
Thank you, Max, for informing us that we're getting to that mark. I also was in the minority of thinking that we could do this without a facilitator. I still think that way. I think that these have been helpful. I think that with staff, we could have moved this forward together. But I also think that reaching 15,000 to have these conversations is a bit much. So yeah, thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments? I'll go ahead.
I do, Anita. This is Anita. I have a quick question. I thought that the original budget was for 4 meetings for that 10,000. Why is a 5th meeting 50% more?
That was my question too.
No, what she originally proposed to you was 5 meetings. We shrunk that to 4 meetings, and then we went back to a 5th meeting. So we're back to where we started in terms of the number of meetings that were proposed to you in the scope.
Correct, but if 4 meetings was going to be $10,000, I'm confused as to why the jump is to 15,000 versus 1,250.
The original proposition to you was 5 meetings, $10,000.
Okay, so then I'm even more confused about why the how the cost has crept.
Me too.
Is it just because there is more research on the back end than was contemplated?
We have done a great deal of effort with many hours in preparation between the staff and Heather preparing for these presentations.
Max,
We grew out of scope a little bit to me in the conversations about community engagement, which was not part of what I thought we were discussing at all on this. And we invested a lot of time talking about that. And that was not something I thought was going to be part of this.
Community engagement is not part of this scope. What I indicated was when we get to the end of the 5th meeting, which is the one we added in for December, depending on what your desires are, to proceed forward or not with community engagement. We'll address that at that time.
Okay, and I apologize, I wasn't more clear. I meant the last two meetings. We've talked a lot about community engagement and preferences there. I think one meeting we spoke for an additional hour to 45 minutes on it.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was outside of the scope of what we had originally agreed on. So, but yeah, I guess we need to complete this conversation now. Obviously, we've started on it. You guys have done a great job with all of the preparation. And I really appreciate the amount of effort and trying to look at different ways to communicate this. So I guess go forward. But I guess I'd like to keep it constrained to what the original scope was.
Max, can you clarify, because I'm hearing different comments coming back. We have a current contract that's worth $10,000. And that covers the 5 meetings, correct?
We did not execute a contract because this is well below that threshold.
Okay, but let me rephrase it. We have said we would have a budget of using Heather's services for 5 meetings for $10,000. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, it is, with an anticipated amount of effort on her part for each of those meetings in preparation. What I'm saying, to give you the product that we've presented through 3 meetings so far, has taken a great deal more effort and research than was originally anticipated in that estimate.
All right, so is the request that you're trying to provide to us then that the order to finish out the research, the formulations of the presentations, and going through the meetings, going to take some additional amount over and above the 10,000, which you've indicated may be 5,000. And I guess the question, I think the question on the board is, if we were getting X number of meetings for $10,000, adding a meeting or even 2 meetings to half of the value of the original estimate is what's being questioned.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say at this point. There was an agreement for 5 meetings at $10,000 for what she anticipated was the level of preparation for those meetings. We have expended a great deal more effort than was expected and anticipated at the time of that original estimate. We have not exceeded the $10,000. We're at about that point right now, and that's why I needed to present that to you this evening. Is either it's my recommendation that we continue the last 2 meetings and set a cap of spending at $15,000 total, and which is an additional $5,000, or we stop that effort right here.
All right, so let me ask you the next part of this question is, are the presentation materials for the remainder of the meetings to be held, are they completed?
Still, the water portion is complete, which we got through about 2/3 to 3/4 of that tonight. The follow-on for wastewater and then the 5th meeting are not prepared at this point.
And what you have left to prepare, can that be done with just internal staff without expending additional funds with an outside resource?
Can it be done?
We would not lead the meetings, Mayor. We would not lead the meetings. We'd conduct the meeting with you leading the meeting, and as we normally do. But no, we would not facilitate. We'd be there to provide information and report. The function that she provides and the interactions that go on, we would turn to you as the mayor to do that. I don't recommend that. I think she's done a good job for us. I'll summarize what Max has said about 4 or 5 times in that she has spent a lot more time than she anticipated. She under-anticipated the amount of time that would be necessary to prepare initially and then also for each meeting. and it's going to cost $5,000 more to get her to the end of this. But if you don't want to spend that, Max wanted to bring that forward to you, and I would just tell you that we could regroup and provide the reporting out and the presentations that we do with our city staff, but we'd have you really fulfilling her role, Mayor.
All right, I understand. But I wanted to be clear because of some of the questions that were being asked by the other council members where we're at. So we've had as much of an explanation as I think we're going to get that's going to make sense. And we're talking about potentially of another 5,000 for the remaining 2 meetings that are scheduled to go. And then we drop the whole issue unless we want to give consideration at a later date as to whether or not we want to use her services for community outreach, which is not currently on our plan. So the question to the council is, do you want to expend the additional funds, or do you want to stop Heather's work where it's at tonight? And then we will go back to a normal presentation. Staff will give us data and we'll facilitate the meeting ourselves. Councilor Smith.
I think we can facilitate it ourselves. I think we can finish out. I think she set a good baseline as far as where we're at, but I believe that we could finish this out.
Mayor Pro Tem Sides.
I believe I've already answered, which was I'm not happy about it. I think that this was a 4-3 vote to begin with. I didn't realize that we were going to have to be put in this position. But I think we now need to at least finish this conversation. I just don't want any of that effort to be, I mean, I feel like we spent all of this time talking about the different communication strategies, which was not part of what we had wanted this conversation for. So I'm frustrated there. So I guess I'm not wild about doing it, but I feel like we do need to respect all of the effort that our staff has put into this. But I'm not happy about it.
So are you proposing that we stop with her here, or we continue for her?
No, to continue, but I don't want to have any more energy or time at this point to go into community outreach plans. I'd like us to, I wish we would have stayed within the scope of what we had all agreed to.
Councilor Demont, I think I know your answer. You're ready to curtail now?
Same position. I would rather we don't, but I'll defer to the majority.
Fine. Councilor Bowles.
Like Mayor Pro Tem Sites, I'm very unhappy about this. So her working with staff, we're kind of in this, we're 2/3, 3/4 of the way through. So I don't think we have a choice, but I am really not happy about it, that we're to this stage and we agreed to this many meetings and we agreed to this amount, and I am really unhappy.
Councilor Scully.
Yeah, I have to agree with my fellow councilors, Bowles and Mayor Pro Tem Sites. I feel like that we haven't quite gotten what we were hoping to get by this point. You know, we were looking to be able to really critique the water system and make decisions. And I think we've gotten a good amount of information that's been very helpful, but I'm just not sure that it's above and beyond what our staff quality always gives us anyway. But I do feel that we're in this now, and I want to see what the outcome is. So I am voting to move forward for 2 more meetings. But then from there, I want to see us take it on ourselves.
Councilor Seymour. Or did we lose him?
Just quietly disappears.
Yeah. I see him on the camera and I can't tell if he's still in the mix or not.
It says he's offline.
Okay.
He may have lost connection. Let's give him a minute, see if he can get back. Don, do we have anybody on from the IT side that can tell if he's totally gone?
He has just texted me. He said he has lost connection again. He's trying to reconnect.
All right,
And
let's
then
give it,
frustration. So
give him a minute, see if he can get back. There you are. Welcome
Thank you.
back. Thank you,
Thank you.
Counselor. I don't know where we lost you for sure, Counselor Seymour. But-
It was just when Mayor Pro Tem Sites was, discussing the frustration and the wasted, the used time to discuss strategies, then I lost right then.
Okay. Well, right now we have tried to poll the council to see if they want to terminate the contract or the agreement with Heather at this point, move on without her. The staff doesn't recommend it. There's frustration that we are here at 2 meetings left and we've used up the funds that were allocated. And the question is, do you want to finish it out with her? You want to drop it here with her and do it with the staff, where it would be more, staff will give us the information and facilitating would be like any other study session?
I'm not sure. I did vote in favor of Heather originally, just to give us a different perspective. But I'm a little frustrated too about a 50% increase. It looks like she has spent a great deal of time with staff because the information has been compressed a little bit, which is helpful. But yeah, I'm not in favor of a 50% additional expenditure at this point, though.
Okay, so everyone understands that if we decide to go without her, and we will go back to a normal study session, council or a staff will present the material, and then we will facilitate the meetings within ourselves, just like we do on a normal study session.
Yep.
Everybody under the same understanding?
Yes, sir.
All right, Max. I'm in the same business that she is, where I do consulting work, and when I underestimate something, I eat it. And I'm the frustration of the council. I would not want to cast a deciding vote to go spend half again what we've already allocated. So I think the majority right now is we'll end Heather here.
Understood.
All right. You have anything else, Max?
No, I don't.
Okay. Council, I wanted to give you an update before you turn off tonight. This is what's been going on all day today from the governor's office, from Metro Mayors, from the Adams County, Jefferson County, everybody else with its COVID numbers. Jefferson County currently is at 492.9 with an 8.3 positivity rate. Adams County is at 817.7 with a 12.7. Based on the projections of us complying with issues in the statewide levels of the pieces that they are monitoring, Jefferson County will be going to level orange or level 3 of the Safer at Home effective Monday. Several counties have been pushed into the same level 3 by the state. Adams County was already there. The projection that we got from the state today is that we will exceed hospital bed capacity. At 1,800 bed capacity will be exceeded before Christmas at the minimum level. There are 2 other curves, and I'll try to get the slide from the state and get those to you hopefully tomorrow or Monday, that shows that if we got a 10% or a 20% reduction, that we would still see those numbers exceed the capacity up to the point of being almost to the mark of 3,500 capacity beds, but we only have 1,800 available. The surge centers that are being looked at, such as the old St. Anthony's Hospital and a couple of others, it would take 2 to 4 weeks to get a surge center open. That's equipment-wise and facility-wise. They do not have staffing capacity to man them. Contract capacity through the various hospitals and stuff are not available to go to surge capacities. They are having trouble staffing their hospitals today. Effective at 10 p.m. tomorrow night, Adams County will be under a new public health order, which will be released sometime before noon tomorrow. No spectators of any kind at any event outdoors. Restaurants can offer curbside service after 10 p.m., but they will close at 10 p.m. Restaurant party size is reduced from 10 in restaurants to 6, and no households, more than 2 households in a party at the restaurants. They have discovered that a number of people are skirting the issue of consuming alcohol after 10 o'clock by buying up quantities of it at 9:45, 9:50, whatever, or getting chips that they buy before 10 o'clock and then using them after 10. So they're clarifying the order that no public place that sells alcohol can serve after 10 o'clock, nor allow consumption in their facility after 10 o'clock. There is an increased effort by the counties, plural, to ask businesses to continue to increase the amount of remote work, if at all possible. At 10 o'clock tomorrow night, Adams County will go under a curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. every night. These orders are being released again, hopefully before noon tomorrow. They take effect tomorrow night at 10 p.m. As far as I know, that is the only big pieces that affect us. The state is continuing to monitor all counties. They warned us today that they may take the position of moving us to stay at home on a county by county basis, depending upon whether or not we can see any slowing or reversal of the infection rates. Almost every county in the county metro area, I think there's 25 counties right now out of the 64 that are in the red or stay at home mark on the board that they use, meaning that that many of them are at 350 or above in their infection rates. No county within the state has shown a reversal of their numbers if they're at 350 or above. They're all considering a very steep incline of increased infectivity as well as positivity rates. The state will continue to monitor us on a daily basis to see if we're seeing any reversal in numbers, and then we will get direction through the health departments of what the counties will be told to do. That is the most up-to-date information I have as of an hour and a half ago since I joined the call. That's the update, and that's all I have for you. We hope to have copies of the orders as soon as they come out from Adams County tomorrow. I don't know what Jefferson County Health will do over the next day or two, but they've already been forced into the level 3. The mitigation plan that they had submitted to the state was to be able to stay at level 2, but that's been rejected by the state. But with the incline of their numbers, I expect that they will probably be issuing orders similar to this. Most of the health departments are recommending following the lead that was originally put out by Denver to go to the curfew and trying to slow down the contamination spreads. So how soon they may or may not adopt those will be up to the individual health departments and counties. If you've got a question, if I can answer it, I'll try to, but I think I've given you what I got out of basically a full day of back-to-back meetings on COVID. Okay, if there's nothing else, I think.
I was just going to say thank you for attending those meetings. That's really
for your time
sobering
tonight.
news.
I apologize for being. It's not getting any better. The picture is getting worse. And I basically, the state also indicated that if they have to put us into stay at home, they expect that the minimum time could be as much as a month, because these numbers statewide are climbing up so fast. All right, good night, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.